Chapter 26-20. The two of them walked back to their residence while talking and laughing. To be honest, Xiaochen was very happy with Xian Yuanling's strategy this time. The two of them walked back to their residence while talking and laughing. To be honest, Xiaochen was very happy with Xian Yuanling's strategy this time. In the following days, Xiaochen did not leave the sword sect and waited for the results of the search. This matter was naturally left to Xian Yuanling to take care of. The entire sword sect was wildly searching for Xia Tian's whereabouts. Not only was it the sword sect, even the saber sect, Moon Palace, Dan Valley, and the other large powers were participating in this. When they learned from the sword sect that Xia Tian was not dead and had returned to the boundless world, other than being shocked, the large powers all began to take care of this matter, wanting to find Xia Tian's whereabouts. After all, for the large powers of the Great Thousand World, Xia Tian was their common enemy, and he was a very terrifying enemy. The tragedy of the war between good and evil in the past, as well as the losses it brought to the Great Thousand World, no one had forgotten about it. No one wanted to experience that kind of war again. So, for a potential threat like Xia Tian, the Saber Sect, Dan Valley, Moon Palace, and the other large powers all had the same idea as the Sword Sect. They had to kill him in the cradle. They definitely could not give Xia Tian and the evil martial artists any chance of reviving. There was no need to kill any danger in the cradle, this was the best method. All the powers of the boundless world began to move, and there were martial artists all around searching for Xia Tian. It could be said that the entire boundless world was covered in an inescapable net, looking like they had to dig 3 feet into the ground to find Xia Tian. Only, even if the Sword Sect and the other large powers made a big move, after several days, they still did not find any clues about Xia Tian's whereabouts. Being in charge of searching for Xia Tian, Xian Yuanling was very busy these past few days, and Xiaochen was much more relaxed. He hadn't rested for a few days. Every day, Xian Yuanling had to check the information gathered from various places. However, none of this information was good news for Xian Yuanling. After reading the information from various places once again, Xian Yuanling frowned slightly and said, "All the major cities have been searched so many times, but there's still no news." That's right. According to the intensity of our search, if the evil sky god is in the Great Thousand Era, he definitely won't be able to escape our search, Sang Xing and the others, as well as several Sword Sect elders, agreed. The intensity of the search this time was no joke. If Xia Tian was really hiding in the Great Thousand World, it would be impossible for him to escape detection. However, there was no trace of him so far, which made everyone feel somewhat helpless. Large streets and small alleys, even going from house to house, not even letting off a normal family. But even like this, it was like Xia Tian had disappeared from the world. Regarding this, Wu Wan had some guesses. Do you think that Xia Tian has already left the Great Thousand World? Perhaps Xia Tian had already left the Great Thousand World. Regarding this, Xian Yuanling shook his head and said, "It shouldn't be possible. Since Xia Tian dares to return to the Great Thousand World, how could he leave without doing anything?" Xian Yuanling didn't think that Xia Tian would leave the Great Thousand World this easily, otherwise, why would he risk coming back? Reading Book Pavilion. After thinking for a bit, Xian Yuanling finally said, "I think that not only the cities, we should increase our search in other places as well. Including those desolate places without people, I'm afraid that will be the focus of our search." Since there were no traces of Xia Tian in the major cities, they could only increase their search range. However, everyone was a bit hesitant about this. If it's like this, then it will be much more difficult. We have to think of a way to complete it no matter how hard it is. If we don't find Xia Tian, it will always be dangerous. Xian Yuanling replied to this. Searching the entire Great Thousand World, even searching those desolate places, this was without a doubt a large project. However, there was no other way. If they wanted to find Xia Tian, they could only do this. Xian Yuanling's order was quickly passed down, and the various major forces of the Great Thousand World once again expanded the scope of their search. Furthermore, according to Xian Yuanling's instructions, the focus of the search shifted from the various major cities to the desolate and uninhabited places. The various large powers wildly searched for Xiaotian's whereabouts, and at the same time, the evil path remnants hidden in various places began to move. These evil path remnants had used various methods to escape the large powers' search. Although there weren't many of them, with Xiaotian's return, there was a fire burning in their hearts again. After all, no one wanted to live like a rat on the street. Xiaotian's return gave them a large amount of confidence, as if they could see the scene of the evil path being reborn from the ashes. These evil path cultivators also wanted to find Xiaotian and fight with him against the various large powers. However, they didn't dare show themselves now. After all, as long as they showed themselves, they would face the endless pursuit of the various large powers of the Great Thousand World. The entire vast Thousand World was currently caught in an unprecedented search. This kind of search was probably the first time it had appeared in the vast Thousand World. All the powers had joined in and could be seen everywhere. Groups of martial artists were searching for Xiaotian's whereabouts. Xiaotian naturally noticed such a large-scale search, but the current Xiaotian couldn't do anything because the 1,000 cultivators had reached the most critical moment and Xiaotian couldn't move at all. It was still that desolate valley. Looking at the 1,000 cultivators in front of him, some of them had already broken through to the Emperor Realm and others had just broken through to the End Realm. This was the final step and also the most critical step. If it was destroyed now, everything would be for naught. So, even though he knew that the Sword Sect was searching for him, Xiaotian couldn't move at all. After spending this much time and energy, Xiaotian couldn't give up on these 1,000 people because they were his confidence in fighting against Xiao Chen. Without these people, with just Xiaotian alone, it would be very hard for him to fight against Xiao Chen and the Sword Sect. The aura of these 1,000 people, compared to a month ago, it was unknown how much stronger they were. The methods of the Dark Era had truly shocked Xiaotian. Looking at these 1,000 people, a cold light flashed in Xiaotian's eyes as he muttered, "I hope there's still time." As long as these 1,000 people came out of closed-door cultivation, then even if his location was exposed, Xiaotian wouldn't be afraid. He just hoped that the people from the Sword Sect and the other large powers wouldn't find this place so quickly. Time. What Xiaotian needed right now was time. He just needed a bit more time. Chapter 26-21. Xiaotian had no way of moving right now, but the only thing worth rejoicing about was that these 1,000 people would only need a few days to come out of closed-door cultivation. Even if they were found by the Sword Sect at that time, Xiaotian would have the strength to fight them. Actually, Xiaotian was not afraid of fighting Xiao Chen and the Sword Sect. Since returning to the large world and participating in the competition for the World Master position, Xiaotian knew that there would be a fight between him and Xiao Chen. There was no doubt about this. Only right now, these 1,000 people had not come out of closed-door cultivation, so it was clearly not the time to fight. If the Sword Sect destroyed them at this time, these 1,000 people would all die. Although the Dark Era's methods were strange, they had their own weaknesses. During this process, no one could disturb them. What the evil spirits lacked the most right now was time, but the Sword Sect was approaching step by step and the entire large world was searching for him. If this continued, it would only be a matter of time before they found this place. He secretly prayed in his heart, but Xiaotian also knew that he was lying to himself. He had to think of a way to stall for time, otherwise if these 1,000 people couldn't come out, all his plans would be for naught. To stall for time, Xiaotian actually didn't have any other choice. The only thing he could do was to use himself as bait, only then would he be able to stall for time. To put it bluntly, Xiaotian would take the initiative to expose himself and attract the attention of the Sword Sect. When the time came, the Sword Sect would not pay attention to anything else. But like this, the danger was still very large. But based on the current situation, Xiaotian did not have any other choice. If these 1,000 people were found by the Sword Sect before they came out, everything would be for naught. Thinking of this, Xiaotian also stood up and disappeared on the spot. The Sword Sect's search continued and they were getting closer and closer to the valley Xiaotian was in. Not long after leaving the valley, Xiatian met a group of Sword Sect disciples. There was a deacon leading them and there weren't many of them, only around 10 people in total. At this time, the 10 Sword Gate disciples were searching for Xiatian's whereabouts while chatting with each other. You're saying that Xiatian will be in these places? This place is deserted. Not many people come here at all. Who knows? But this is the sect master's order. We can only carry it out. As he spoke, an indifferent voice came from the front. Are you looking for me? With these words, Xiatian's figure appeared out of thin air in front of everyone. Towards Xiatian, these Sword Sect disciples were not unfamiliar with him. In each of their hands, there was a portrait of Xiatian. All of a sudden, everyone's expression changed drastically. The deacon in the lead immediately took out his voice-transmitting talisman and prepared to send the news back to the Sword Sect. Regarding this, Xiatian did not stop him. After all, his goal was to use himself to draw away the Sword Sect members. When the deacon used his voice-transmitting talisman, Xiatian revealed a faint smile and made his move. He easily killed this group of Sword Sect disciples. Xiatian had finally appeared. In the Sword Sect, after Xianyuan Ling received this news, he immediately told Xiaochen. Regarding this, Xiaochen immediately said, I'll personally go. Other than that, I'll have the others seal off the area, we can't let him escape. To deal with Xiatian, Xiaochen had to personally go. Although he couldn't confirm Xiatian's current cultivation, Xiaochen estimated that he was at least in the Ancestor Realm. Facing an Ancestor Realm expert like Xiatian, the other members of the Sword Sect were definitely not his match. Only Xiaochen and Junwia could fight him. Xiaochen personally left the Sword Sect and rushed to where Xiatian had appeared. At the same time, the experts of the Sword Sect kept gathering there. Only, Xiatian was not waiting in the same place. After killing this group of Sword Sect disciples, in just a day, Xiatian appeared in another city 10,000 miles away and directly destroyed it. Xiatian did not have any intentions of hiding his whereabouts and his actions were incomparably high profile. Destroying a city was without a doubt telling the Sword Sect where he was. Following Xiatian's movements, the Sword Sect members gradually formed an encirclement. But before this encirclement could be formed, Xiatian was already prepared to break out. Naturally, it was impossible for him to be surrounded by the Sword Sect since he was alone. If he was surrounded by the Sword Sect, even Xiatian would be in danger. Xiatian's goal was to pin down the Sword Sect, otherwise the Sword Sect would have the time to pay attention to other places, giving the 1,000 people enough time to escape. He wanted to break out of the encirclement. The Qinling mountain range was an important part of the encirclement, so naturally there were experts of the Sword Sect guarding it. Sangxing and Zhousong were personally guarding it. On this day, Sangxing and Zhousong had just finished a night of cultivation when a terrifying pressure appeared in the sky. The two of them did not have time to think as they charged into the sky. At the same time, there were many Sword Sect disciples. The one who had come was Xiatian. Seeing Xiatian, Sangxing and Zhousong's faces sank, but Xiatian revealed a cold smile as he said, Sangxing, Zhousong, ha, ha. It was a simple cold smile, but the killing intent in his voice was self-evident. Hearing this, Sangxing and Zhousong did not dare act carelessly. Although the two of them were Emperor Realm Masters, Xiatian's strength could not be compared to theirs. Xiatian chose to break out of the Qinling mountain range because he was not willing to let the Sword Sect completely surround him. Xiatian wanted to use his flexibility to keep the Sword Sect's strength tied down, making it impossible for the Sword Sect to surround him. Sangxing and Zhousong had obviously guessed Xiatian's intentions. At this time, Sangxing sent a message to Zhousong, delay him, Sect Master will definitely arrive in the time it takes to brew a cup of tea. Xiaochen had naturally been chasing after Xiatian these past few days, but unfortunately, Xiaochen did not have a way to accurately pinpoint Xiatian's position, so he was always a step behind. This time, facing the Sword Sect's encirclement, Xiatian could only take the risk of breaking out. Sangxing and Zhousong's mission was to delay him. It wouldn't take long, just the time it takes to brew a cup of tea. When that time came, Xiaochen would naturally arrive. Seeing that the two of them had no intention of making a move, Xia Tian knew that they wanted to stall for time, so without any hesitation, Xia Tian made the first move. You want to stall for time, but it's a pity that your strength is still a bit lacking. Directly sending out a punch, the pressure of an ancestor realm cultivation erupted. Just facing Xia Tian's pressure alone, Zhang Xing and Zhou Song felt their scalps tingle. But right now, it was impossible for the two of them to retreat, so facing Xia Tian's punch, the two of them could only use all their strength to block it. Seeking collection, seeking monthly votes, seeking recommendation. This chapter ends. Chapter 26-22. Zhang Xing and Zhou Song definitely wouldn't back down. If Xia Tian escaped, it would be even more troublesome to find him in the future, so facing Xia Tian's punch, the two of them could only grit their teeth and fight to the death. Zhang Xing and Zhou Song definitely wouldn't back down. If Xia Tian escaped, it would be even more troublesome to find him in the future, so facing Xia Tian's punch, the two of them could only grit their teeth and fight to the death. The news had already been sent to Xiaochen, so as long as Xiaochen rushed over, there would be nothing left for them to do. Seeing the two of them actually want to fight him head-on, Xia Tian gave a cold snort. Humph, mayflies trying to shake a tree, seeking death. Xia Tian's current cultivation had definitely reached the ancestor realm. It was different from Hermit Mo's previous methods, which made Xia Tian look like he was just a facade and even wasted his innate potential. The methods of those old fellows from the Dark Era were naturally not something Hermit Mo could compare to. With the help of those old fellows from the Dark Era, Xia Tian could be said to have been refined from inside out, completely different from before. It was because of this that Xia Tian had the confidence to fight for the position of World Master with Xiaochen. At this moment, facing Zhang Xing and Zhou Song's obstruction, Xia Tian did not hide the killing intent in his heart. In his eyes, Zhang Xing and Zhou Song were mayflies trying to shake a tree, not knowing life and death. Trifling Emperor Realm cultivators daring to block him, what was this if not seeking death? Sending out a punch, even if Zhang Xing and Zhou Song worked together, when the attacks of the three collided, it was clear that Zhang Xing and Zhou Song did not have the ability to block Xia Tian's punch at all. The gap between the two sides was very large, so large that it was already exaggerated. Facing this, Zhou Song angrily roared, attack together and block him. The two of them had underestimated the strength of an ancestor realm master. It was very difficult for the two of them to block Xia Tian, so there was no other way. They could only have the surrounding sword sect members attack together and gather everyone's strength, only then would they have a chance of stalling Xia Tian. Hearing Zhou Song's words, the surrounding sword sect disciples, elders, and deacons all attacked together. Gathering everyone's strength, they finally blocked Xia Tian's attack. But even like this, when this attack fell, there were still quite a few people from the sword sect who had fallen. But this was already a very good result. After all, everyone had successfully blocked Xia Tian's attack. But this was only the beginning. Seeing his attack being blocked, Xia Tian's face became even more gloomy. He knew Zhang Xing and Zhou Song's goal, so Xia Tian did not have much time to waste. He had to break out of the encirclement before Xiaochen arrived, otherwise the situation would become even more disadvantageous for him. Xia Tian currently wanted to deal with the sword sect and not fight to the death with the sword sect. So, for the current situation, Xia Tian did not have any intention of facing Xiaochen. After all, Xiaochen was not a crooked melon. Even if he had been reborn, if he faced Xiaochen, to be honest, Xia Tian did not have any confidence in winning. Thinking of this, Xia Tian did not give Zhang Xing, Zhou Song, and the others a chance to breathe. He attacked wave after wave, not holding back at all. Even if they gathered everyone's strength, facing Xia Tian's wild attacks, they soon found it hard to hold on. The strength of an ancestor realm master was not something that could be defeated by numbers. Of course, if there were over 100 Emperor Realm Masters attacking together without any fear of death, there might be a chance. The unique Chinese network, however, this was only a possibility. Even if they succeeded in the end, at least half of the 100 Emperor Realm Masters would be killed. Not to mention, there were only 2 Emperor Realm Masters, Songxing and Zhou Song. As for the others, they could be ignored and there was no need to care about them at all. The line of defense had been forcibly torn apart by Xia Tian, and Songxing and Zhou Song were vomiting blood from the corners of their mouths. Their auras were chaotic, as if they had been seriously injured. Seeing that Songxing and Zhou Song were seriously injured, Xia Tian was even more unforgiving. He rushed forward, wanting to kill the 2 of them in one fell swoop. Xia Tian was not unfamiliar with the 2 of them, knowing that they were the mainstays of the Sword Sect. If he could kill the 2 of them, it would be a big blow to the Sword Sect. Seeing Xia Tian rush forward, a terrifying pressure enveloped the 2 of them, not giving them any chance to break free. For a moment, Songxing and Zhou Song were powerless to resist. The 2 of them could only accept the result of being killed by Xia Tian. However, just as Xia Tian was about to attack and the 2 of them were about to be killed, a sword slashed out and successfully blocked Xia Tian's attack, saving Songxing and Zhou Song in the nick of time. Xia Tian, you really made it difficult for me to find you. Along with the sword, a cold laugh came from the sky and a black figure flew over. The person who came was no one else but Xiaochen. After receiving Songxing's message, Xiaochen had immediately rushed over. In order to save time, Xiaochen had come alone and did not bring anyone else. He wanted to kill Songxing and Zhou Song, but who would have thought that Xiaochen would catch up in the end? Seeing the safe and sound Songxing and Zhou Song, Xia Tian's expression became very ugly. At this time, he still had a chance to kill the 2 of them, but once he did, he would be entangled by Xiaochen. It would not be easy for him to escape at that time. Once he couldn't escape immediately, the Sword Sect's people would definitely surround him. Even if Xia Tian wasn't afraid of fighting Xiaochen, one couldn't forget that the Sword Sect still had Jun Wuya. If Jun Wuya came, Xia Tian really didn't have any confidence in fighting 1 against 2. Using his life to exchange for Songxing and Zhou Song's lives or letting them go for now, this choice for Xia Tian was not hard at all. So, without any hesitation, Xia Tian gave up on making a move against Zhou Song and Xia Tian. With a flash, he wildly ran out of the encirclement. Xia Tian naturally wasn't willing to gamble. After all, killing Songxing and Zhou Song didn't mean much to Xia Tian. As long as Xiaochen didn't die, the Sword Sect wouldn't fall. So, Xia Tian wouldn't put himself in danger because of Songxing and Zhou Song. Seeing Xia Tian quickly running away, Xiaochen didn't stop at all as he chased after him. At the same time, he shouted in a cold voice, "Xia Tian, do you think you can still run this time? I want to see just how many lives you have to die." Xia Tian was indeed like a cockroach that couldn't be killed. From the first war between good and evil to the second war between good and evil, Xia Tian had already died twice, but he always came back from the dead. Especially this time. Even though Tian's punishment had already killed him, who would have thought that he still wasn't dead? Xiaochen admired Xia Tian's tenacious vitality, but so what? No matter how many lives Xia Tian had, this time, Xiaochen wouldn't give him a chance to come back from the dead. He would consign him to eternal damnation this time. Chapter 26-23. After Xiaochen arrived, Xia Tian's first reaction was to run away. He was even disinclined to pay attention to Songxing and Zhou Song. Seeing this, Xiaochen naturally would not let Xia Tian leave this easily. He also did not care about the injuries of Songxing and Zhou Song as he chased after Xia Tian. After learning that the person chosen by the Dark Era was Xia Tian, the killing intent in Xiaochen's heart was very strong. This was because to Xiaochen, Xia Tian's threat was much bigger than the others. So even if there was only a trace of a chance, Xiaochen would use all his strength to kill Xia Tian. He would not give him any chance to make a comeback. Xia Tian could already be considered an old enemy and this fellow's life was very hard. He also had many methods, so this kind of threat had to be killed in the cradle. Xia Tian was very fast and Xiaochen was moving as fast as he could. The 2 of them, one in front and one behind, instantly moved very far away. Seeing Xiaochen chasing after him, Xia Tian's face was very dark. Seeing the two of them getting closer and closer, how could Xia Tian not know what Xiaochen was thinking? Seeing Xiaochen like this, he was determined to kill him. Even if he had to pay a price, Xiaochen would not hesitate at all. Xiaochen was indeed thinking like this. In order to kill Xia Tian, Xiaochen was willing to pay a price. Even if the price was very serious, so what? As long as he could kill Xia Tian, it was all worth it. The distance between them closed step by step. When Xia Tian entered Xiaochen's attack range, Xiaochen did not hesitate to send out a slash with his sword. The tip of the slash flew out, aiming at Xia Tian's back. Feeling the dense killing intent coming from behind him, Xia Tian had no choice but to dodge to the side. After all, Xia Tian did not have the courage to ignore Xiaochen's attack. If he was hit by Xiaochen's sword, Xia Tian would be heavily injured. It was also because of this dodge that Xia Tian's speed became much slower. Xiaochen seized this chance and directly jumped forward, successfully catching up to Xia Tian. Moreover, he launched an attack without any explanation. "I already said that you won't be able to leave today," he said coldly. His hands did not stop attacking. Faced with Xiaochen's attack, Xia Tian saw that there was no hope of escaping, so he could only make a move to resist. The two of them instantly began to fight. Meeting again, Xiaochen was no longer the brat from before. Xiaochen's cultivation was the same as Xia Tian's, reaching the ancestor realm. Facing an opponent that Chen Jin could only look up to, Xiaochen could already fight with him. Under Xiaochen's fierce attacks, Xia Tian was at a disadvantage for a while. The main reason was because Xia Tian did not have any intention of fighting to the death with Xiaochen right now. Those over 1,000 cultivators had not come out yet, and Xia Tian did not want to be entangled with Xiaochen at this time. Moreover, what Xia Tian was most worried about was the other ancestor realm expert in the sword sect, which was Xiaochen's master, Jun Wuya. Although Jun Wuya had not appeared yet, Xia Tian could not ignore him. Once Jun Wuya arrived, Xia Tian would not be able to deal with two ancestor realm experts at the same time. There were also so many experts in the Swords Gate. Although these experts wouldn't enter Xia Tian's eyes under normal circumstances, now that Xiaochen and Jun Wei were holding them back, if Xia Tian still had to divert his attention to deal with the other people in the Swords Gate, it would simply be seeking death. 61 Many ants can bite an elephant to death. These words were not empty words. Not to mention the fact that the Sword Sect could become the ruler of the boundless world, how could they lack experts? If these people all charged at him, even Xia Tian would find it hard to fight against them with two fists. It was because of this that Xia Tian did not want to fight to the death with Xiaochen at this time. If he wanted to fight against Xiaochen and the Sword Sect, Xia Tian was very clear that he could only rely on those over 1,000 cultivators. Only when they came out of seclusion and he had a group of people under him could he fight against the alliance. As for now, with just Xia Tian alone, it was indeed hard for him to fight alone. Xia Tian wanted to avoid this fight, but Xiaochen did not give him a chance. After entangling Xia Tian, Xiaochen's attacks could be said to be very fierce, as if he would not stop until he died. Under Xiaochen's wild attacks, it could be said that Xia Tian was suffering. He wanted to escape, but he did not have a chance, and Xiaochen did not give him a chance. There were many times when Xiaochen did not hesitate to exchange injuries to keep Xia Tian here. To Xiaochen, even if they were both injured, as long as Xia Tian did not have a chance to escape, it would be his gain. After all, as long as Xia Tian did not have a chance to escape, once the other members of the Sword Sect and Jun Wei arrived, Xia Tian would be dead without a doubt. Xiaochen's idea was very simple, which was to keep Xia Tian here no matter what. Regarding this, Xia Tian did not dare exchange injuries with Xiaochen. Like this, Xia Tian would not be able to display his full strength. With this, Xiaochen slowly took the initiative. Being suppressed by Xiaochen, Xia Tian's heart was depressed, but there was nothing he could do. As the fight continued, the killing intent in Xiaochen's eyes became stronger and stronger. The sword in his hand did not stop at all, not giving Xia Tian any chance to catch his breath. Damn! Cursing in his heart, Xia Tian saw that Xiao Chen's fighting spirit was getting stronger and stronger, and his situation was getting worse and worse. As time passed, Xia Tian didn't know when the other masters of the Sword Gate would arrive. He had to think of a way to escape as soon as possible. His eyes were ice cold, and in that instant, Xia Tian made a decision in his heart. Being delayed by Xiao Chen like this, the result would definitely not be good. So, Xia Tian also made a decision. Although it was a bit painful, there was no other way. With things like this, he could only do this. With a thought, he communicated with the black token in his storage ring. This black token was given to him by those old fellows from the Dark Era. There was only one, but it could save Xia Tian's life at a critical moment. This black token, those old fellows from the Dark Era had already said that unless they met a world master, no one could destroy it. This was what Xia Tian had always relied on. He thought that he would save this token for the most critical moment to give it to senior brother, but who would have thought that he would have to use it at the beginning? His only life-saving treasure was about to be used now. Xia Tian's heart ached, but there was no other way. Looking at Xiao Chen, the killing intent in his eyes became even stronger. Xia Tian spoke in a cold voice. "Xiao Chen, don't be happy too early. This is only the beginning." Chapter 26-24. He didn't have time to waste with Xiao Chen. He didn't know when the experts of the Sword Sect would arrive. If he was surrounded by the experts of the Sword Sect, it would be even harder to escape. So, Xia Tian made his decision and used the black token, the only life-saving treasure those old fellows from the Dark Era had given him. As soon as his voice fell, the black token was directly crushed by Xia Tian. At the same time, a black light fell from the sky and covered Xia Tian's body. Seeing this, Xiao Chen naturally wasn't willing to let Xia Tian leave like this, so he immediately made his move. However, facing Xiao Chen's attack, the black light wasn't affected at all. It didn't even create a single ripple. It seemed like it was like those old fellows from the Dark Era said. Unless the World Master personally made a move, no one could break this black token. Xia Tian's heart calmed down and he looked at Xiao Chen with a dark expression as he spoke in a cold voice. "Xiao Chen, don't be happy too early. The fight between the two of us has only just begun." Running away this time, Xia Tian was also considering the big picture. It didn't mean that Xia Tian didn't have the strength to fight Xiao Chen. For Xia Tian, what he really needed to do right now was to close up those 1,000 people. As soon as his voice fell, the black light slowly dissipated and Xia Tian's figure disappeared along with it. Looking at Xia Tian with killing intent, in the end, when Xia Tian's figure completely disappeared on the spot, Xiao Chen couldn't feel any aura at all. Xia Tian's method indeed made Xiao Chen unable to do anything. Their auras had completely disappeared and Xiao Chen couldn't stop it at all. Watching Xia Tian escape in front of him again, Xiao Chen was indeed a bit angry, but he couldn't do anything. Thinking about it, it was clear that this was a life-saving method those old fellows from the Dark Era gave Xia Tian. Xiao Chen naturally didn't have much confidence against those old guys from the Dark Age. After all, even Lin Yun's tone was filled with fear when she talked about the Dark Age. He had missed the best chance to kill Xia Tian. Although Xiao Chen didn't know what other tricks Xia Tian had, Xiao Chen was certain that Xia Tian wasn't as simple as he seemed on the surface. In the dark, Xia Tian must have made some preparations, otherwise he wouldn't have been able to compete with him. With just Xia Tian alone, even if he was a genuine Ancestor Realm expert, wanting to fight the entire Sword Sect by himself was an impossible and unrealistic matter. A cold glint flickered in his eyes. At the same time, Nangong Guan, Long Qing, and the others also arrived. Their speed was naturally slower than Xiao Chen's, so they were a bit slower. When everyone arrived, they found that Xia Tian's figure had already disappeared. There was no need to ask, Xia Tian must have run away. Xiao Chen didn't hide this and said with a helpless smile, "He has a life-saving treasure on him." Xia Tian indeed relied on the black token to escape. Otherwise, with Xia Tian's strength, even if he wanted to leave, he wouldn't be able to do it so easily. Xiaochen would definitely make him pay a price. At that time, even if Xia Tian could escape, he would definitely be injured. Only, with the life-saving treasure those old fellows from the Dark Era gave him, Xiaochen really wouldn't be able to do anything to him for now. Hearing Xiaochen's words, Longqing comforted him, "A stray dog, he can't jump around for long." Longqing's words were clearly meant to comfort Xiaochen, but Xiaochen shook his head and said with a faint smile, "The longer it drags on, the more dangerous it is. Xia Tian definitely has other preparations. I always felt that he took the initiative to appear this time to stall for time. He had always been hiding in the dark, but Xia Tian had suddenly appeared this time with such great fanfare. Xiaochen had already suspected that this fellow wanted to stall for time. Otherwise, with Xia Tian's personality and intelligence, it was impossible for him to not know that he couldn't fight the sword sect with just his strength. It was also impossible for him to recklessly expose himself like this. So, Xiaochen always suspected that Xia Tian had deliberately exposed himself. As for the reason, Xiaochen didn't know for now. But no matter what the reason was, the longer it dragged on, the greater the threat Xia Tian posed. Not only Xiaochen, even Longqing and the others were clear on this point. But there was no other way. If they let Xia Tian escape this time, it wouldn't be easy to find him again. Moreover, the most important problem was that the things Xia Tian had prepared behind the scenes, Xiaochen didn't have any information on when they would succeed. As soon as his voice fell, he saw everyone's faces turn serious. Xiaochen said with a smile, "All right, we'll deal with it as it comes. Let's go back first." They didn't stop searching for Xia Tian. As long as Xia Tian didn't die, Xiaochen and the sword sect wouldn't be at ease. But without any clues, Xiaochen didn't know where to start, so he could only return to the sword sect first. Of course, the most important thing was to discuss with Xian Yuanling, Nandong Guan, Wu Huan, Lin Qing, and the others were still searching for Xia Tian. Xiaochen and Longqing returned to the sword sect with Zhang Xing and Zhou Song. The two of them were heavily injured and had almost died at Xia Tian's hands. They didn't have any battle strength for now, so Xiaochen brought them back to the sword sect to rest. Once they returned to the sword sect, Xiaochen immediately went to find Xian Yuanling. Since the matter with Xia Tian, Xian Yuanling had been in charge of the sword sect, taking care of all the small and large matters. With all these trivial matters, Xian Yuanling was indeed very tired. Hearing that Xia Tian had successfully escaped, Xian Yuanling didn't have any time to rest at all. After hearing Xiaochen's story, Xian Yuanling slightly knit his brows and said, "I also feel that Xia Tian definitely has some tricks he hasn't used yet, and it should be related to those missing people." Xian Yuanling and Xiaochen had the same thoughts, suspecting that Xia Tian still had some tricks up his sleeve. Xian Yuanling's thoughts were even further, already suspecting that it was related to those missing martial artists. After all, these people had disappeared at the same time. Although there was no evidence that these people's disappearance was related to Xia Tian, whether it was Xian Yuanling or Xiaochen, they were certain that it was related to Xia Tian. Xia Tian's strange actions this time, according to the two of them, were to stall for time. Then there was an 80% chance that it was related to those missing martial artists. Hearing Xian Yuanling's words, Xiaochen silently nodded. Then he helplessly said, "Do you think that Xia Tian is increasing the strength of these people to fight the sword sect? Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." This chapter ends. Chapter 26-25. Xiaochen guessed that Xia Tian was increasing the strength of these people so that they could fight against the sword sect in the future. It had to be said, Xiaochen's guess was correct and there was no problem. Regarding this, Xian Yuanling also agreed. Xiaochen guessed that Xia Tian was increasing the strength of these people so that they could fight against the sword sect in the future. It had to be said, Xiaochen's guess was correct and there was no problem. Regarding this, Xian Yuanling also agreed. It should be like this, so the most important thing right now is to find the whereabouts of these people. Finding the whereabouts of Xia Tian and the 1,000 martial artists as soon as possible was the most important thing right now. Xiaochen also agreed with this. Letting Xia Tian escape this time, not only did Xiaochen not stop the search, he increased the intensity of the search. No matter what, they had to find Xia Tian. Even if they couldn't find him, finding the whereabouts of the 1,000 martial artists was also good news. Of course, this matter fell onto Xin Yuanling's head in the end. Looking at Xin Yuanling, Xiaochen said with a smile, "Big brother, I'll have to trouble you with this matter." "Me again? Then what are you doing?" Hearing this, Xin Yuanling said with a helpless expression. Although Xin Yuanling didn't personally rush to the front lines during this time and didn't participate in the search, arranging these matters and analyzing the information from all over the place had already made Xin Yuanling very busy. It wasn't exaggerated to say that Xin Yuanling hadn't rested for several days. This kind of work was very tiring, but regarding this, Xiaochen said in a carefree voice, "If you don't do this, who will? Big brother doesn't want me to do everything. Then again, I need to recover enough energy to deal with Xia Tian, so I'll leave this behind-the-scenes matter to Big Brother. I'm assured with you doing this." Xiaochen really understood Xin Yuanling's role. Just talking about this matter, Xin Yuanling's performance made Xiaochen unable to find fault with him. Xin Yuanling could be said to have arranged everything perfectly. Although Xia Tian had escaped in the end, this wasn't related to Xin Yuanling at all. First, Xin Yuanling's encirclement had indeed surrounded Xia Tian. If it wasn't for Xia Tian having a life-saving treasure from those old fellows from the Dark Era, it would have been hard for him to escape. Hearing Xiaochen's words, Xin Yuanling sighed helplessly. Then, he said unhappily, "Let's make it clear first. After this matter is over, you can't arrange anything else for me. I need to have a good rest. I'm exhausted." In the end, Xin Yuanling agreed, and Xiaochen naturally agreed to his request. If there was nothing, Xin Yuanling could rest however he wanted, but if there was something, he couldn't blame Xiaochen. Moreover, if the situation was really urgent, even if Xiaochen didn't say anything, could Xin Yuanling just stand by and watch? With the relationship between the two of them, Xin Yuanling definitely wouldn't just stand by and watch Xiaochen get into trouble. So, towards Xin Yuanling's request, Xiaochen agreed without any hesitation. Regarding this, Xin Yuanling naturally knew what Xiaochen was thinking, but he didn't care. The current plan was to take care of Xia Tian's matter first. After all, this matter was a large matter that could shake Xiaochen's foundation. Thinking about it, if Xia Tian obtained the position of World Master in the Boundless World, it would be a devastating blow to Xiaochen. After discussing this matter, Xiaochen didn't stay for long because Xin Yuanling was busy again. He kept analyzing the information from various places, determining where Xia Tian and the 1,000 over-cultivators could be hiding, and making the corresponding arrangements. He didn't have time to care about Xiaochen at all, and Xiaochen had nothing to do here. Not to mention that Xiaochen wasn't interested in these things to begin with. If he had to analyze this information all day, it would be better to just kill him. Dog-eat-dog Xiaochen directly slipped away, and Xin Yuanling continued his bitter and busy life. Returning to his residence, there was no news of Xia Tian and the 1,000 over-cultivators for now. Xiaochen couldn't run around like a headless fly, so staying in the Sword Sect and waiting for news from Xin Yuanling was undoubtedly the best choice. Once there was any nervousness, Xin Yuanling would definitely inform him as soon as possible. This was something that Xiaochen was very clear on. The search became more and more intense, and under Xin Yuanling's arrangements and orders, even the Saber Sect, Dan Valley, Moon Palace, and other large powers participated. It could be said that right now, the entire boundless world was searching for Xia Tian and the 1,000 over-cultivators. Under this kind of high-intensity search, it was like Xia Tian had disappeared from the face of the earth. There was no news at all, which made Xin Yuanling's mood more and more irritated. However, Xin Yuanling was very clear that the more it was like this, the more he had to remain calm. Once he became impatient, there would be a deviation in his judgment and it would be impossible to find Xia Tian's whereabouts at that time. He still methodically dealt with all kinds of matters. On this day, in the valley where the 1,000 over-cultivators were in closed-door cultivation, a group of Heavenly Plan Palace disciples welcomed them. These Heavenly Plan Palace disciples were also under orders to search for Xiatian, but it was a pity that they didn't find anything. On this day, they accidentally came to this valley. Originally, this valley was very ordinary and no one would pay attention to it. However, when these Heavenly Plan Palace disciples entered the valley, they immediately noticed something strange. The entire valley was filled with blood pools of different sizes, and these blood pools were almost dried up. At the same time, there was a figure sitting cross-legged in each blood pool. These people are the missing cultivators, the leader of the Heavenly Plan Palace said. Then, without thinking too much, he took out a voice transmission talisman and directly sent the news back to the Heavenly Plan Palace. They didn't expect that the 1,000 over cultivators that so many powers were searching for would actually appear here. They had unintentionally made a great contribution. It was a pity that this contribution was only a contribution, but they didn't have the life to enjoy it. This was because when the Heavenly Plan Palace deacon took out a voice transmission talisman to contact the Heavenly Plan Palace, the figures in the blood pools suddenly opened their eyes. Instantly, several terrifying auras soared into the sky. End Realm. The few people who woke up were all at the End Realm. Moreover, they weren't at the initial End Realm. They were at least at the small perfection End Realm. Feeling the terrifying pressure, the deacon's face sunk. He was prepared to order everyone to escape, but unfortunately, before he could say anything, a bloodlight flashed and directly pierced through his forehead. Killed in one strike. As the deacon fell, the fate of the remaining Heavenly Plan Palace disciples was obvious. With their strength, how could they deal with the few End Realm cultivators? It was a one-sided massacre. Not long later, the valley was filled with corpses. The Heavenly Plan Palace disciples were all killed on the spot without exception. Chapter 26-26. This group of Heavenly Policy Mansion disciples was lucky enough to find these cultivators. However, it was also because of this that they seemed to have opened the door to hell. Who would have thought that these cultivators with ordinary strength, cultivation, and talent would transform into End Realm experts in such a short period of time? An End Realm expert, even in the Heavenly Policy Mansion, was in existence that could become an elder. Due to the changes in the era, the martial path of the Great Thousand World had improved a lot, and it could even be said that it had completed a brand new transformation. The most obvious change was naturally the appearance of Ancestor Realm experts. However, even so, End Realm cultivators still couldn't be underestimated in the Great Thousand World. After all, under normal circumstances, cultivators who could reach the End Realm could be considered a big figure. Before they died, this group of Heavenly Policy Palace disciples seemed to have seen the cultivators who attacked them. Their cultivations were probably not outstanding among the 1,000 or so people here, because several of them had clearly reached the Emperor Realm. What kind of method could make these cultivators with ordinary talent and no background, not to mention having a deep foundation, transform into End Realm and Emperor Realm experts? Such a terrifying increase was unbelievable. However, the only fortunate thing was that the news had been successfully sent back to Heavenly Policy Mansion. At this time, Heavenly Policy Mansion should have already reported this matter to the Sword Sect. Finally, they found the whereabouts of more than 1,000 warriors. The Heavenly Policy Mansion and the Sword's Gate reacted very quickly. They immediately sent the news to the Sword's Gate. At the same time, Xianyuan Ling, who was in the Sword's Gate, immediately informed Xiaochen. After receiving the news, Xiaochen hurried over and asked as soon as he saw Xianyuan Ling, "There's news." But it seems like we're still a step too late," Xianyuan Ling nodded and replied. They had indeed found the whereabouts of these 1,000 people, but from the current information, it seemed like they were still a bit late. Xiatian had used some unknown method to turn these people into experts. The group of Heavenly Policy Mansion disciples that discovered these people were instantly killed. Xianyuan Ling's guess was right. Xiatian must have obtained some method from Heavenly Policy Mansion, which was why he could raise the strength of these 1,000 people to such a level in such a short period of time. Although he didn't know if this method had any side effects, No matter what, these 1,000 people couldn't be treated lightly. It could even be said that they would become a huge problem for the Sword Sect. They were also Xia Tian's greatest reliance to fight against the Sword Sect. When he received the news, Xian Yuanling understood why Xia Tian had purposely exposed his whereabouts. Perhaps it was to buy time for these 1,000 people. At that time, these 1,000 people should still be in closed-door cultivation. So, Xia Tian did not hesitate to use himself as bait to divert the attention of the Sword Sect. If they could find the whereabouts of these 1,000 people a bit earlier, the Sword Sect would have been able to exterminate them in the cradle. But it was a pity that they were a step too late, which made people very angry. Hearing Xian Yuanling's words and seeing his disappointed expression, Xiaochen said with a calm smile, "There's no need to be too conflicted, there is no perfect thing in this world. Since we're a step late, then it's too late. But at least we found their whereabouts, right?" Xiaochen was quite optimistic. It was fine if they were a step late. Anyway, there would be a battle that couldn't be avoided, so they would just deal with whatever came. Seeing Xiaochen's calm appearance, Xian Yuanling helplessly shook his head and said with a bitter smile, "Then what do we do now? What else can we do? We'll make the first move and directly fight with Xia Tian." Hearing this, Xiaochen said with a smile. But this time, Xian Yuanling had a different opinion. Although he had complained before, Xian Yuanling was very clear that these size wouldn't change anything. So, from the beginning, Xian Yuanling had been thinking of countermeasures. And now, Xian Yuanling already had a relatively perfect plan in his mind. While Xian Yuanling and Xiaochen were discussing how to deal with the situation, in the valley, after the Heavenly Policy Mansion disciples were killed, the 1,000 cultivators came out of their cultivation one after another. The methods of the Dark Age were indeed unfathomable. These 1,000 ordinary rogue cultivators seemed to have become completely different people under this method. They had undergone a qualitative change from the inside out. Their cultivation had definitely increased. At this time, among the 1,000 or so people, dozens of them had already reached the Emperor realm, and a few of them had even reached the peak Emperor realm. As for the rest, their cultivations were almost all in the End realm. This kind of power was already comparable to the Sword Sect. In the entire Sword Sect, even if they took out all their trump cards, the number of masters they had would probably be around these few. No wonder Xia Tian had so much confidence in these 1,000 people. However, after coming out of seclusion, it was unknown if they were affected by something, but these 1,000 people's expressions became extremely cold. They gave people a chill just by looking at them. As these people woke up one by one, Xia Tian also appeared in the valley at an unknown time. Looking at these 1,000 people who had successfully come out of seclusion, Xia Tian couldn't help but reveal a smile on his face. This kind of team, even the evil god palace of the past didn't have this kind of team. With so many masters, this was Xia Tian's trump card against the Sword Sect. However, Xia Tian was very clear that all of this was given to him by the Dark Age. Since those old fellows could give him this kind of power, they would definitely have a way to take it back and return him to his original state. To put it bluntly, Xia Tian was clear in his heart that he was just a dog beside those old fellows from the Dark Age. Whoever they wanted him to bite, he, Xia Tian, would spare no effort to bite them. But even like this, Xia Tian was still immersed in this kind of power and couldn't extricate himself. With this kind of power, Xia Tian was willing to be a dog for the Dark Age, a dog that helped them control the boundless world. Not to mention that he was a dog in front of those old fellows, but in front of others, he, Xia Tian, was an unreachable existence. Adding in the fact that when these 1,000 people saw Xia Tian, they all respectfully called out to him, "Master." This made Xia Tian's heart burn even more. His lips couldn't help revealing a smile as he softly muttered, "It's time to find a place to stay. Xiaochen, I've already said that this is only the beginning. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." This chapter ends. Chapter 26-27. Under the temptation of power, Xia Tian had completely sunk into it. To be honest, Xia Tian enjoyed this kind of strength and wasn't willing to let it go. Under the temptation of power, Xia Tian had completely sunk into it. To be honest, Xia Tian enjoyed this kind of strength and wasn't willing to let it go. Looking at the 1,000 warriors in front of him, each one of them had become extremely powerful, and this was all given to him by the Dark Era. With this group of people, Xia Tian was confident that he could contend against the Sword Sect and Xiaochen. With a confident smile on his face, Xia Tian waved his hand and everyone quickly left the valley. It was like Xia Tian had said, it was time to find a place to settle down. Now was the time to face the Sword Gate. This valley wasn't far from the Sword Sect. After Xia Tian's group left, what was strange was that the Sword Sect didn't appear. Logically speaking, after discovering the intentions of Xia Tian and the 1,000 warriors, the Sword Sect should have chosen to surround and annihilate them. But this time, the Sword Sect didn't do so. Was the Sword Sect afraid? Obviously not. The real reason was Xian Yuanling and Xiaochen. Because Xiaochen didn't give the order, his subordinates naturally wouldn't make a move. At this moment, Xiaochen and Xian Yuanling were sitting together. After hearing Xian Yuanling's words, Xiaochen said with some hesitation, "Wouldn't this be a little?" "Don't worry, I will arrange everything." "Third brother, don't worry. We will just be a step slower. Since things are already like this, we can borrow Xia Tian's hands to solve the problem that third brother has always wanted to solve." Xian Yuanling said with a smile. Hearing Xian Yuanling's words, Xiaochen was silent for a moment before nodding. "All right, then it's up to you." Xiaochen didn't reject Xian Yuanling's plan. Xian Yuanling smiled and didn't say anything else. With Xiaochen's personality, it wasn't suitable for him to deal with this matter. So, as Xiaochen's big brother, Xian Yuanling could only personally sweep away all the obstacles. Xian Yuanling's idea was very simple. Since the 1,000 warriors had successfully come out, Xia Tian would definitely make a move soon. Xia Tian's first target wouldn't be the Sword Sect, he should be looking for a place to stay in the boundless world. In this kind of place, the best choice was naturally the other large forces. After all, as long as they captured them, everything would be ready. Xia Tian had over 1,000 warriors under him, they wouldn't be afraid of fighting with the Sword Sect. So, Xian Yuanling's idea was to let Xia Tian attack these forces, and then at the final moment, the Sword Sect would make a move and save them. At that time, they could officially merge these forces into the Sword Sect, including Dao Ju, Xiao Xiao, Li Chun, and the others. These people were people that Xiaochen wanted to absorb into the Sword Sect, and they would become the cornerstones of the Sword Sect in the future. Only he didn't have a chance to show it, so it was delayed until now. Now that he finally had a chance, Xian Yuanling naturally wouldn't miss it. Anyway, he couldn't avoid fighting Xia Tian, so it was better to think of a way to obtain some benefits. Xiaochen agreed to Xian Yuanling's plan, so the Sword Sect didn't immediately make a move. Xia Tian did what Xian Yuanling thought and directly targeted the Saber Sect. The Saber Sect was one of the 10 great heaven ascending sects in the past. Although it couldn't compare to the Sword Sect now, if he took down the Saber Sect, Xia Tian would have a place to stay in the boundless world and would have a foundation. Like this, he would be able to compete with the Sword Sect. Xia Tian's thoughts were completely guessed by Xian Yuanling, but the Sword Sect still didn't have any intentions of helping. The time wasn't right yet. Riding Brush House with the Saber Sect's strength, it was impossible for them to deal with Xia Tian's group. Not to mention the 1,000 cultivators, because the methods of the Dark Era could not be compared to the past, just the Ancestor Realm expert Xia Tian was not something the Saber Sect could contend against. They headed straight for the Saber Sect. At the same time, inside the Saber Sect, Dao Ju and Dao Xiong were still talking about Xia Tian. Looking at his son, Dao Xiong said, "Who would have thought that Xia Tian would come back from the dead? Moreover, he is much stronger than before. He is also a person with great luck. Isn't that nonsense? If he didn't have great luck, how could he compete with Xiaochen for the position of World Master?" Hearing this, Dao Ju said with a smile. Dao Xiong asked curiously, Between Xiaochen and Xiatian, who do you think will win? The matter of Xiatian and Xiaochen competing for the position of World Master was no secret in the boundless world. Dao Xiong was naturally curious as to who would win in the end. Although Xiaochen's performance was enough to make people gasp in surprise, Xiatian was clearly not a simple person. He died again and again, but he came back from the dead again and again. It was as if Xiatian could fight for a chance of survival each time. Faced with his father's question, Dao Ju curled his lips and said, "Based on the current situation, Xiaochen has a higher chance of winning. Moreover, I also hope that the final winner will be Xiaochen. I think father also doesn't want the position of World Master to fall into Xiatian's hands." From the bottom of their hearts, Dao Xiong and Dao Ju definitely hoped that Xiaochen would win. Most people in the boundless world probably thought the same. After all, in terms of prestige, Xiaochen definitely surpassed Xiatian. Xiatian's reputation in the boundless world was not good. Just his identity as an evil martial artist was enough to make many people dislike him. Hearing Dao Ju's words, Dao Xiong smiled and didn't say anything. However, at this moment, a terrifying pressure suddenly appeared in the sky above the Saber sect. This pressure was like a mountain fiercely pressing down, enveloping the entire Saber sect. Feeling the appearance of this terrifying pressure, Dao Xiong and Dao Ju's expressions changed. They looked up at the sky at the same time. At the same time, figures appeared in the sky. Xiatian. With a single glance, Dao Xiong saw Xiatian in front of the crowd, as well as the thousands of martial artists beside him. Xiatian's arrival was something that Dao Xiong never expected. He never thought that Xiatian would actually target the Saber sect. Dao Xiong didn't want to guess Xiatian's intentions. In any case, he definitely didn't come with good intentions. As expected, after Xiatian appeared, he spoke in an indifferent voice. "Dao Xiong, submit to this lord and this lord can guarantee you a lifetime of wealth and glory." Xiatian's first words were to make Dao Xiong submit. Hearing this, Dao Xiong's face sank. The disciples, attendants, and elders of the Saber sect all looked as if they were facing a great enemy. It could be said that they were not prepared at all. The Saber sect was completely unprepared for the sudden appearance of Xiatian's group. However, Xiatian was filled with confidence. The confidence in his words was telling Dao Xiong a fact. Either submit or die. Chapter 26-28. Actually, Xiatian didn't have any special feelings towards Dao Zongchen's refusal to submit. It wasn't that he had to make Dao Zongchen submit to him. After witnessing the terrifying methods of those old fellows from the Dark Age, Xiatian's vision had become much higher. To be honest, he looked down on Dao Zongchen. Actually, Xiatian didn't have any special feelings towards Dao Zongchen's refusal to submit. It wasn't that he had to make Dao Zongchen submit to him. After witnessing the terrifying methods of those old fellows from the Dark Age, Xiatian's vision had become much higher. To be honest, he looked down on Dao Zongchen. Dao Xiong and Dao Ju were the only two Emperor Realm Masters in the Saber sect. Looking at Xiatian's surroundings, there were at least several dozen Emperor Realm Masters. This was the gap between the two sides. So, Dao Zongchen's refusal to submit didn't have any meaning to Xiatian. Dao Xiong, however, had a serious expression. However, he wasn't stupid. At least Dao Zongchen wasn't a match for Xiatian's group. So, after pondering for a moment, Dao Xiong said to Dao Ju, "Contact the Sword Sect." Right now, only the Sword Sect could fight Xiatian. Hearing this, Dao Ju didn't hesitate and directly contacted the Sword Sect. Seeing that Dao Xiong didn't reply for a long time, Xiatian revealed a cold smile. "Dao Xiong, this king will only give you 3 breaths of time. If you don't submit, there's no need for Dao Zongchen to exist. Damn it, activate the sect protecting array." Dao Xiong clearly had no intention of submitting and immediately ordered the activation of the sect protecting array. Although he knew that Dao Zongchen's sect protecting array wouldn't be able to stop Xiatian's group, Dao Xiong had no other choice. Submitting to Xia Tian was definitely impossible. Right now, Dao Xiong could only hope that the sword sect's reinforcements would arrive as soon as possible. Seeing Dao Zongchen's sect protecting array activate, Xia Tian revealed a disdainful smile and coldly said, "Reckless." In Xia Tian's eyes, the Saber sect's so-called sect protecting array was simply a joke. If they wanted to rely on this sect protecting array to block him, that was simply a fool's dream. What a joke! As soon as he finished speaking, Xia Tian threw out a punch. A terrifying fist glow fiercely slammed into the Saber sect's sect protecting array. Instantly, the entire sect protecting array began to wildly tremble. Seeing this, Dao Xiong also cried out loudly. "Disciples of the Saber sect, listen up. Use all your strength to activate the formation." Now they could only gather the strength of the entire Saber sect. Hearing this, all the disciples, deacons, and elders of the Saber sect wildly poured their spiritual energy into the sect protecting array, hoping to block Xia Tian for a bit longer. With the support of everyone's spiritual energy, the sect protecting array quickly stabilized, but Xia Tian's expression didn't change at all. He just softly said, "A final struggle." It was indeed a final struggle. Gathering the strength of the entire Saber sect, they could indeed stall for some time, but that was all. It was impossible to stop Xia Tian at all. Xia Tian clearly didn't have any intentions of stalling for time. He directly said to the people beside him, "Let's attack together and break this laughable turtle shell." After saying this, Xia Tian took the lead to attack. At the same time, the 1,000 cultivators beside him also attacked. Instantly, all kinds of martial skills wildly exploded in the sky above the Saber sect. The Saber sect's sect protecting array was also in imminent danger. Especially the disciples of the Saber sect, they were all injured by this terrifying power. Indeed, they couldn't hold on for long. Right now Dao Xiong was also doing his best to maintain the array. The sect protecting array was Dao Xiong's only support, but based on the current situation, it wouldn't be able to last for long. "I hope we can make it in time." He could only silently pray in his heart. While the Saber sect was in imminent danger, at the same time, in the Sword sect, Xianyuan Ling naturally received a letter from the Daoju. The contents of the letter were very simple. It was a request for help. After receiving the letter, Xianyuan Ling looked at Nangong Guan in front of him. He said to Zhou Song and the others with a smile, "It seems like the Saber sect's situation isn't good. Is there even a need to say that? The Saber sect can't stop Xia Tian." Hearing this, Nangong Guan said with a bit of displeasure. It was very clear that Nangong Guan didn't understand Xianyuan Ling's actions. In Nangong Guan's eyes, Xianyuan Ling still wanted to scheme against the Saber sect in the Moon Palace at this time. He wanted to borrow Xia Tian's hand to obtain more benefits. With Nangong Guan's personality, Xianyuan Ling's actions were completely unreasonable. So she couldn't understand and naturally had some opinions about Xianyuan Ling. Xianyuan Ling naturally knew about this, but he didn't have any intention of explaining. There were some things that had to be done by someone. Moreover, for Xiaochen, Xianyuan Ling, was willing to take the blame. He didn't care about morality, he was ruthless, and he was extremely sinister. Xianyuan Ling didn't care about this, as long as he could clear the obstacles for Xiaochen in the future. So, after hearing Nangong Guan's words, Xianyuan Ling only revealed a faint smile. Then he asked Zhou Song to the side, "Are our people all here?" "They're all in position, we can make a move at any time." Hearing this, Zhou Song replied. His attitude was also a bit stiff. From the beginning, Xianyuan Ling had already arranged for the Sword sect's experts to rush to the Saber sect. However, he didn't make a move immediately and was waiting for an opportunity. Now that the opportunity was ripe, the Saber sect was in imminent danger. If he made a move now to save the Saber sect, Xianyuan Ling's next step could be carried out. However, Nangong Guan and Zhou Song didn't know that Xianyuan Ling's original intention was to let the Saber sect be destroyed as long as he saved the Daoju. However, this was rejected by Xiaochen. This was Xiaochen's bottom line. Without any other choice, Xianyuan Ling could only take a step back and save the Saber sect before continuing with the next step of the plan. Although it would be a bit troublesome, he could still achieve his goal. Nangong Guan and Zhou Song didn't know about this matter, otherwise their attitude towards Xianyuan Ling wouldn't just be cold, they would be angry. After hearing Zhou Song's reply, Xianyuan Ling only said a single sentence. "Make your move, the time has come." "You're not going to inform the sect master?" "If the sect master doesn't go, who will fight Xia Tian?" Nangong Guan said in a cold voice. To stop Xia Tian and save the Saber sect, Xiaochen would definitely make a move. However, Xianyuan Ling only said this with a faint smile. "This matter isn't suitable for the sect master to make a move, we need the old ancestor to make a move." It wasn't suitable for Xiaochen to make a move at this time, so the best choice was Jun Wuya. Although Nangong Guan didn't know what Xianyuan Ling was planning, she only stood up and coldly said this before leaving. "Up to you, but there are some things that need to be done morally. The Saber sect has been good to my Sword sect and you're also a member of the Sword sect, as well as the sect master's sworn brother. I hope that you won't bring the Sword sect into the abyss of eternal damnation. That's all I have to say, take care of yourself." Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. This chapter ends. Chapter 26-29. As soon as she finished speaking, Nangong Guan walked away. The dissatisfaction in her voice was very clear. Nangong Guan was indeed quite dissatisfied with Xianyuan Ling's actions. However, Xianyuan Ling did not express his opinion. He only told Zhou Song to follow the plan. After that, Xianyuan Ling went to look for Xiaochen. Not letting Xiaochen appear was also Xianyuan Ling's idea. There were some things that were better left to Jun Wuya. Moreover, the target this time was not Xia Tian, but the Sword sect and the other major forces. At this time, it was not suitable for Xiaochen to appear. When Xianyuan Ling arrived at Xiaochen's residence, Xiaochen was already waiting for him. Jun Wuya was also sitting beside Xiaochen. It was obvious that they had been waiting for Xianyuan Ling's arrival. Seeing Xianyuan Ling walk into the courtyard, Xiaochen nodded slightly. Jun Wuya closed his eyes and asked, "Is it time?" Jun Wuya also knew about Xianyuan Ling's plan and did not say much. He neither agreed nor disagreed. Now that Jun Wuya had spoken, it was obvious that he was asking if it was time for him to make a move. Hearing this, Xianyuan Ling bowed and said, "Yes, you can act now. Then this old man will make a trip." Jun Wuya stood up and looked at Xianyuan Ling indifferently. Then, he floated away. After Jun Wuya left, Xiaochen said with a bitter smile, "Big brother, it's been hard on you." Xianyuan Ling's actions were completely for his own sake. Xiaochen was very clear about this. For this reason, Xianyuan Ling did not hesitate to bear the infamy. From Nangong Guan's attitude, it could be seen that there were many people in the Sword sect who were dissatisfied with Xianyuan Ling's actions. They felt that Xianyuan Ling's actions were too immoral. In their opinion, since the Sword sect was the ruler of the world, it could not do such immoral things. However, they did not think that Xianyuan Ling's purpose was to make the Sword sect stronger. For this reason, Xianyuan Ling did not hesitate to bear the infamy. Hearing Xiaochen's words, Xianyuan Ling smiled and shook his head. "You know that I don't care about this." Xianyuan Ling did not care about this. He was not like Xiaochen. He was not the sect master of the Sword sect, so he did not need of prestige. To put it bluntly, Xiaochen might be the idol of everyone in the Sword sect. Therefore, Xiaochen's image must be righteous. However, Xianyuan Ling was different. He did not need these things. In Xianyuan Ling's opinion, he was more like a knife in Xiaochen's hand. If Xiaochen could not handle something, or if it was inconvenient for him to do it, he, the knife, would deal with it. Xianyuan Ling's position was that he hid in the dark, and he was someone who cleared obstacles for Xiaochen. Most of the time, his methods were not honorable. Therefore, Xianyuan Ling could only bear the infamy. Seeing Xianyuan Ling's indifferent expression, Xiaochen smiled helplessly. Then the two brothers sat across from each other. Xiaochen personally made a cup of tea for Xianyuan Ling and waited for the saber sect's result. With Jun Wuya making a move, there should not be any problems. Of course, even if the saber sect suffered any losses, it was not a bad thing for the sword sect. If it was not for Xiao Chen's firm opposition, Xianyuan Ling would have allowed the saber sect to be destroyed and only saved Daoju. It was because of Xiao Chen's opposition that Xianyuan Ling changed his previous plan and chose to make a move ahead of time. The situation on the saber sect side was becoming more and more dangerous. The sect protecting array was on the verge of shattering. Many saber sect disciples, because they kept pouring their spiritual energy into the array, suffered a backlash along with the attacks of Xia Tian and the others, and died on the spot. Every time Xia Tian and the others attacked, there would be saber sect disciples who would die from the backlash. Although Dao Xiong saw this, there was nothing he could do. Are the people from the sword sect not here yet? His eyes were filled with a cold light as he asked Dao Ju to the side. Since things had reached this point, Dao Xiong naturally felt that something was wrong. The sword sect's reaction was too abnormal. How could there be no movement after such a long time? Hearing this, Dao Ju helplessly said, "They've already replied. They said to hold on for a bit longer." Hearing Dao Ju's reply, Dao Xiong did not say anything else. He could only hold on for now. However, in this situation, how long could they hold on? There were so many disciples in the saber sect and almost half of them had died. Moreover, this was under the protection of the sect protecting array. If there was no sect protecting array, the consequences would be hard to imagine. It was only a matter of time before the sect protecting array was broken. As more and more saber sect disciples died, the sect protecting array would be unable to hold on. At the same time, Xia Tian in the sky looked at the sect protecting array that was already covered in cracks and revealed a cold smile. "Dao Xiong, everything is over. Stubbornly resisting is useless." After saying this, Xia Tian sent out a punch. The fist glow slammed into the array and with a crisp sound, the sect protecting array shattered. Seeing the array shatter, a look of despair flashed in Dao Xiong's eyes. Was everything going to end like this? Without the protection of the sect protecting array, what could the saber sect use to resist Xia Tian and the others? Xia Tian did not even need to take action. Just the dozens of Emperor Realm cultivators by his side were enough to destroy the saber sect. It was not only Dao Xiong who felt despair in his heart. Everyone in the saber sect who was still alive was the same. They looked at Xia Tian in the sky with terrified expressions. Without the obstruction of the array, the smile on Xia Tian's face became even brighter. In his eyes, the saber sect was already easy to capture. However, at this moment, the numerous experts of the sword sect finally arrived. Jun Wuya also appeared in front of Xia Tian in a timely manner. The sudden appearance of the sword sect's experts had undoubtedly ignited the hope in the hearts of the saber sect members. However, Dao Xiong looked at Jun Wuya and the others in the sky and a complicated expression flashed in his eyes. This day has still come in the end. Dao Xiong seemed to have realized something, which was why he said these words. On the other side, Xia Tian was also stunned when he saw Jun Wuya appear. He then smiled and said, "Jun Wuya, it's really been a long time. It has been a long time, but I don't want to see you." Hearing this, Jun Wuya indifferently replied. After speaking, Jun Wuya paused for a moment before continuing. "Enough nonsense, let's fight." After speaking, Jun Wuya did not give Xia Tian a chance to reply and directly chose to attack. Xia Tian was naturally not to be outdone and immediately counterattacked. Naturally, he could tell that Jun Wuya had already broken through to the ancestor realm. His combat strength and cultivation could not be mentioned in the same breath, so he could not be careless in the slightest. The two ancestor realm experts fought fiercely in the sky above the saber sect. Please collect, please vote, please recommend. This chapter ends. Chapter 2630. In the fierce battle between the two Ancestor Realm experts, it was clear that Junwuya's combat strength was inferior to Xia Tian's. After all, Junwuya did not have the talent and luck of Xiaochen, and he did not have the help of those old fellows in the origin world. Therefore, Junwuya's combat strength could only be considered the most ordinary in the Ancestor Realm. However, Xiaochen and Xia Tian were not like this. Because of their different reasons, their combat strength was at the peak of the same realm. After exchanging several hundred moves, Junwuya fell into a disadvantage as expected. Xia Tian also seized this opportunity to suppress Junwuya. Moreover, there was a cold smile on his face as he said, "Junwuya, you are not this lord's match." "So what? Do you dare to fight me?" Hearing this, Junwuya replied indifferently. These words were indeed to the point. Was Xia Tian stronger than Junwuya? This was certain, but did he dare to fight Junwuya? The answer was certain, so naturally he did not dare. Xia Tian was confident in taking down Junwuya in a one-on-one battle, but what about Xiaochen? Although Xiaochen had not appeared yet, could you guarantee that Xiaochen would not make a move? Have you ever seen a wild beast that could guarantee that it would not bite? Therefore, when he heard Junwuya's words, Xia Tian's face sunk and he did not speak. Although Xia Tian had already guessed why Xiaochen did not personally make a move. In the Sword Sect, Xiaochen had said that he had reached a critical moment in his closed-door cultivation and could not come out for the time being, so Junwuya was making a move. But would Xia Tian believe these words? He had already realized that he was being used. Xiaochen wanted to kill with a borrowed knife, and he, Xia Tian, was that knife. However, Xia Tian could not do anything about this and could only helplessly act as the knife in Xiaochen's hand. However, this blade of his was not completely infallible. Once Xiaochen changed his mind and made a move, Xia Tian would be caught off guard and would be in great danger. So, Junwuya had nothing to fear and Xia Tian had no other choice. "Ah, others say that your sword sect is open and honest, but in my eyes, it's only this. You've been forced into a corner with different methods." With a cold snort, Xia Tian cursed. Regarding this, Junwuya did not reply and continued to fight with Xia Tian. Below, Dao Xiong and the others arranged for people to treat the injured Saber Sect disciples while watching the fierce battle in the sky. Actually, Dao Xiong no longer cared about the outcome of this battle because it was impossible for the Sword Sect to lose. What Dao Xiong was most concerned about now was the Sword Sect's future. Also, what about the other Ling Tian sects besides the Sword Sect? The Sword Sect would definitely not let them off. What would come sooner or later, and the Sword Sect's blade had finally come down on them. In fact, the era of the 10 great Ling Tian sects had long passed. It was just that some of the old and stubborn ones refused to accept this fact. The reason why the Swords Gate had never really taken action was probably because they did not want to be implicated too much. And now, the time was right and Xia Tian was the best person to wield the blade, so the Sword Sect used Xia Tian. With this slash, it meant that the era of the 10 Ling Tian sects had come to an end. The current battle in Dao Xiong's eyes was just a formality and there wouldn't be any real results. Just wait and see. Not long after, Xia Tian would definitely take the initiative to retreat. Dao Xiong already had an answer in his heart. Inside the Sword Sect, Xiaochen and Xianyuan Ling were still sitting across from each other. They were leisurely drinking tea while chatting. Master should have already started fighting with Xia Tian, right? After drinking a mouthful of tea, Xiaochen asked in a soft voice. 29 GG. Hearing this, Xianyuan Ling said with a faint smile, "It should be. What if Xia Tian doesn't retreat?" Hearing this, Xiaochen continued to ask. He knew that Junwuya was not as strong as Xia Tian. Xiaochen was certain of this because Xiaochen's current strength was about the same as Xia Tian's. Using his own strength to compare with Junwuya's strength, he would naturally be able to get the result. Xiaochen was a little worried about Junwuya. Regarding this, Xianyuan Ling said confidently, "He won't. If he doesn't retreat, then it's the same to take care of him first." Xia Tian was not a fool. It was impossible for him not to retreat. Even if he didn't retreat, they would just kill him. Although killing Xia Tian would mean that the blade would be gone, without the threat of Xia Tian, Xian Yuan Ling had many other methods to completely end the 10 Ling Tian sects. To put it bluntly, compared to Xia Tian, the Ling Tian sects like the Blade sect were easier to deal with. Xian Yuan Ling had 100 methods to achieve his goal. Hearing Xian Yuan Ling's words, Xiaochen nodded. Thinking about it, it was impossible for Xia Tian not to retreat. Both of them were very confident. As for the Blade sect side, it was as planned. After a fierce battle, Xia Tian finally chose to retreat. In the end, Xia Tian had already taken the advantage. If they continued fighting, the final victor would definitely be Xia Tian. However, Xia Tian still chose to retreat. It was exactly like what they said. Would Xia Tian dare to fight with Jun Wuya? Xia Tian retreated, but Jun Wuya did not have a happy expression on his face. This was because this kind of victory was within his expectations. Secondly, to be more accurate, this was not a victory at all. Seeing Xia Tian escape with his people, Jun Wuya did not give the order to chase after them. Instead, he allowed Xia Tian's group to leave. When Xia Tian's group disappeared, Jun Wuya slowly descended and arrived in front of Dao Xiong. The two of them could be considered old friends. They had known each other since they were young. Seeing Jun Wuya, who was now the ancestor of the Sword sect and an ancestor realm expert, Dao Xiong sighed. Not long ago, he and Jun Wuya were giants on equal footing. But now, facing Jun Wuya, Dao Xiong could only sigh. He could no longer be compared to him. Seeing Dao Xiong's complicated expression, Jun Wuya did not say anything because he did not know what to say. This time, the Sword sect had indeed schemed against the Blade sect. Otherwise, the Blade sect would not have suffered such a large loss. The two of them looked at each other for a long time. In the end, it was Dao Xiong who broke the silence first. "Let's go." As he spoke, he took the lead and walked forward. The two of them slowly walked along the path inside the Blade sect. They did not speak along the way. After a while, Dao Xiong finally spoke. "Actually, I've already guessed that this day would come. Since the day the Sword sect rose, I knew that the 10 great Ling Tian sects would become history." There was not much hatred in Dao Xiong's words. He knew very well why the Sword sect did this. Since an overlord had already appeared, could it be that they could still keep the other overlords from the old era? Hearing this, Jun Wuya glanced at him indifferently and said, "It's inevitable to allow others to sleep soundly beside one's bed. I hope you can understand." Chapter 26:31. Jun Wuya said calmly. Although Jun Wuya did not want to do this, he did not blame Xian Yuan Ling like Nandong Guan did because from the perspective of the Sword sect and Xiaochen, Xian Yuan Ling was not wrong. His starting point was for the sake of the Sword sect and Xiaochen. The Sword sect would not allow any threats, this was inevitable. In the current great wide world, other than Xia Tian, only the Ling Tian sects like the Saber sect could threaten the Sword sect. This threat was not because the Saber sect and the other sects were strong, but because of their influence and rallying power, as well as the changes in the era. To be honest, even if the Ling Tian sects like the Saber sect and the other Ling Tian sects worked together, they would not be a match for the Sword sect. However, they were an old force in the great wide world and were once one of the top 10 Ling Tian sects. Their influence could not be ignored. Moreover, the Sword sect could be said to be on the same level as the Saber sect and the other Ling Tian sects. There was even a period of time when they were not as strong as the Saber sect and the other Ling Tian sects. In this way, what was the Saber sect's existence to the Sword sect? Was it a kind of humiliation? Was it a kind of testimony to the decline of the Sword sect? Therefore, no matter how one looked at it, after the Sword sect became the only overlord of the great wide world, the Saber sect and the other Ling Tian sects could not continue to exist. There was no reason for them to continue to exist. This was like the change of a dynasty. With the emergence of a new dynasty, would the emperor and members of the royal family of the old dynasty be left behind? Obviously, it was impossible. In the eyes of the Sword Sect, the top 10 Ling Tian sects were the kings of the old era. Now that the new era had arrived, the kings of the old era could only retire. How could they stand on the same stage as the new kings? If one were to talk about whether Dao Xiong was angry or resentful, there would definitely be some. However, if one were to talk about hatred, to be honest, Dao Xiong did not have much hatred. If one were to think about it from another perspective, if the Saber sect was the one in power now, the Sword sect would end up in the same way. Dao Xiong might even be more decisive. Compared to a bloody massacre, the Sword sect's method was gentle enough. Moreover, the Sword sect did not destroy the Saber sect. Although they had schemed, they had acted in time to save the Sword sect. And the Sword sect. They arrived at the side of a spirit lake and sat down. Dao Xiong looked at Junhuia and said with a light smile, "Then, how does your precious disciple intend to deal with the Saber sect and me?" To the Sword sect, Dao Xiong's identity was the most awkward. Junhuia looked deeply at Dao Xiong and said slowly, "The Saber sect is disbanded. Those who are willing to join the Sword sect can be taken over by the Sword sect. Those who are unwilling will be dismissed on the spot. As for you, you have two choices. One is to live a carefree life and ignore the affairs of the world. The second is to join the Sword sect and become an ancestor of the Sword sect like me. You don't have to care about anything on normal days. You only have to protect the Sword sect when you're needed." Dao Xiong smiled when he heard Junhuia's words. This was already considered an extra kindness from Xiaochen and Junhuia. After all, with his identity, the best way to solve this problem was naturally to end it once and for all. It would save him a lot of trouble if he killed them directly. However, the Sword sect gave him two choices. Moreover, no matter which choice he chose, it was not a bad outcome for Dao Xiong. In fact, the second choice was to join the Sword sect and become an ancestor. His status was almost the same as Junhuia's. At least on the surface, it was enough to give him status and face. Dao Xiong could naturally guess that the reason for this was probably because Junhuia and Xiaochen remembered their old friendship. In fact, this was indeed the case. If they followed Xian Yuanling's wishes, Dao Xiong and the others would definitely be killed. After all, dead people were the safest. However, Xiaochen strongly opposed it. Xian Yuanling wanted to abolish the former Ling Tian sect. Xiaochen could accept this and had no objections. However, Xiaochen was not willing to kill Dao Xiong and the others. Of course, Junhuia was not willing to do so either. This was especially true for Dao Xiong, Luo Xing, and Dan Qingyang, who had always been on good terms with the Sword sect. Xian Zhuba. The resentment in his heart dissipated a little. When he saw the smile on Dao Xiong's face, although it looked bitter, it at least showed that the resentment in his heart was gradually dissipating. Junhuia continued. "From a personal standpoint, I hope that you can join the Sword sect. That way, you will have a chance to break through to the progenitor realm. Besides, moreover, the Sword Gate will be more at ease. After all, it's right under their noses, right?" Hearing Junhuia's words, Dao Xiong interrupted him before he could finish. The Sword sect naturally hoped that Dao Xiong would choose the second path. After all, compared to becoming a rogue cultivator, becoming a patriarch of the Sword sect would make Xiaochen feel more at ease. To put it bluntly, it meant that he would be placed under house arrest and monitored. Junhuia did not refute Dao Xiong's words. He calmly waited for Dao Xiong to continue. Seeing Junhuia's reaction, Dao Xiong knew that he was right. He stood up, turned his head to look at the grass and trees around him, and softly muttered to himself. "I founded the Sword sect single-handedly. I've lived here for so many years. I watched it grow step by step, watched it grow stronger, and now it's declining step by step. To be honest, it's like I'm looking at my own child. I'm filled with reluctance." He was reluctant because the Sword sect was his life's work. However, it was destroyed just like that without any ability to resist. Everything before him, including the grass and trees, was so intimate to Dao Xiong. However, from today onwards, the sword sect would no longer exist in the Great Thousand World. Hearing Dao Xiong's sigh, Junwuya did not say anything. He only listened quietly. After saying a lot, he revealed all the reluctance in his heart. In the end, Dao Xiong looked at Junwuya and said, "All right, I'll go back to the sword sect. All right, I'll follow you back to the sword gate. However, if these disciples of the saber sect are unwilling, I hope that the sword gate will be lenient." Of course. Hearing this, Junwuya happily nodded and agreed. In the end, Dao Xiong chose the second path, which was to join the sword sect and become a patriarch in name only. He had the title of a patriarch, but he did not have any real power. In other words, he was just like a mascot. On the way back, perhaps because he had thought things through, or perhaps because he had completely given up, Dao Xiong gave off a much more carefree feeling. Even his cultivation had loosened. Sensing this, Dao Xiong was stunned. Junwuya smiled bitterly and said, "Is this the end of the bitterness for you?" "Haha, it's not really the end of the bitterness. Cultivation is the cultivation of the heart. In the past, I had too many worries. Now that I've let go, I'll naturally have some comprehension. Just like you, you've been idle your entire life. That's why your cultivation is always ahead of mine." Chapter 26-32. His cultivation base, which had remained stagnant for many years without showing any signs of nervousness, actually showed some signs of loosening at this moment. Although it was only a little, it was enough to make an expert at Dao Xiong's level excited. After all, every little bit of improvement was extremely difficult. His cultivation base, which had remained stagnant for many years without showing any signs of nervousness, actually showed some signs of loosening at this moment. Although it was only a little, it was enough to make an expert at Dao Xiong's level excited. After all, every little bit of improvement was extremely difficult. However, Dao Xiong was not in such a good mood right now. Instead, he was somewhat self-deprecating. Indeed, it was undeniable that letting go of some things in one's heart was indeed helpful for the improvement of one's cultivation base. In response, Junwuya only smiled and said nothing. Dao Xiong had no choice but to follow the sword sect's instructions and deal with the saber sect's matter. Junwuya remained in the saber sect for the time being to assist with the saber sect's matters. That day, Dao Xiong had already informed the higher-ups of the saber sect of the matter. Of course, Dao Xiong did not say that the sword sect had forced them to do so. Instead, he put all the blame on himself and analyzed many things for everyone. "Everyone, this old man has decided to disband the saber sect. Times have changed and it is no longer the same as it was back then. This old man also intends to let the saber sect's disciples join the sword sect. Of course, this old man will also become the patriarch of the sword sect." After hearing Dao Xiong's words, the upper echelons of the saber sect were naturally no fools. At the very least, they were able to guess what exactly had happened. However, no one pointed it out. Just as Dao Xiong had said, the current era was no longer the same as before. The disappearance of the saber sect was inevitable from the very beginning. With Junwuya personally overseeing the situation, nothing would happen. The higher-ups of the saber sect did not dare to do anything out of line. On the other side, after the dust had settled on the saber sect, Xianyuan Ling also sent people to the Dan Valley, Moon Palace, and other Lingtian sects. The saber sect was just a breakthrough. Next, Xianyuan Ling would have to face people from other Lingtian sects. Inviting them to the sword sect was to put an end to the old era. The experts of the sword sect came knocking on the door one after another. The Moon Palace's experts were fine, as they had also guessed the intentions of the sword sect. Luo Xing and Xiao Xiao were not too opposed to this. After meeting with the sword sect's emissary, Luo Xing looked at Xiao Xiao, who stood before her, and said softly, "It seems the sword sect has taken action. Boundless should be in the saber sect right now." Yes, according to the news, the saber sect has already decided to disband. Many of the saber sect's experts have chosen to join the sword sect. Hearing this, Xiao Xiao replied with a calm expression. Luo Xing wasn't against joining the Swords Gate. In fact, she was looking forward to it because she would be able to spend time with Jun Wuya in the future. Liking Jun Wuya for a lifetime had always been Luo Xing's dream. Therefore, without much hesitation, Luo Xing had already made her choice. It was impossible. In addition, Luo Xing was also interested in joining the Sword Sect. Naturally, the Moon Palace would follow suit. However, everything would have to wait until they joined the Sword Sect. However, the other factions, such as Dan Valley and the Heavenly Policy Palace, were somewhat hesitant. These two factions had also received news from the Saber Sect. They knew the current situation of the Saber Sect and the attitude of the Sword Sect. To be honest, they were somewhat opposed to disbanding or joining the Sword Sect. However, there was nothing they could do. In Dan Valley, Dan Qingyan looked at the distant sky and sighed faintly. 77 ebook. What will come will come. This day can't be avoided. Dan Xian stood quietly behind Dan Qingyan. As soon as he finished speaking, Dan Qingyan turned to look at Dan Xian and asked, Dan Xian, do you hate the Sword Sect? Logically speaking, the Sword Sect wanted to annex the Dan Valley. To put it bluntly, they wanted to destroy the Dan Valley. Dan Xian and Dan Qingyan should hate the Sword Sect. However, after hearing Dan Qingyan's words, Dan Xian replied with a calm expression. Like I said before, what will come will come. We can't avoid it. This is inevitable, isn't it? We've been prepared for it. Since they had already guessed that such a day would come, there was nothing they couldn't let go of now. Times had changed. The disappearance of the Dan Valley was a decision of history. Just like in the long river of time in the great wide world, many factions like the Dan Valley had been destroyed and drowned in the long river of time. Now it was just the Dan Valley's turn. Hearing Dan Xian's words, Dan Qingyan didn't say anything else. He knew that the Sword Sect's messenger this time was inviting Dan Qingyan and the others to the Sword Sect to discuss the matter of Xiatian, but in reality, they were talking about the various large powers merging into the Sword Sect. As for the reason, Dan Qingyan had already guessed it. It was because they were facing a great enemy, and in order to deal with Xiatian, everyone should work together. In order to better command, the suggestion was for the Dan Valley, the Heavenly Plan Palace, the Moon Palace, and the other large powers to temporarily merge into the Sword Sect. As for the disciples under them, they would temporarily be treated as disciples of the Sword Sect. Only, the word temporarily was a lie. Once they were merged into the Sword Sect, it would be impossible to separate them. Of course, they could reject them, but the Sword Sect was clearly trying peaceful means before resorting to force. Once they rejected them, they would be mercilessly killed by the Sword Sect. As for the reason, if the Sword Sect wanted to destroy a power, did they still need a reason? They could just find an excuse. If they wanted to condemn someone, they could always find a pretext. Dan Qingyan had guessed everything, but he had no way of stopping them. The other powers were also the same. But if one had to say who was the most depressed right now, it was without a doubt Xiatian. After leaving the Sword Sect, Xiatian had led people to attack a medium-sized power and temporarily used it as a shelter. At this time, night had fallen and Xiatian was sitting alone in his cave with a cold expression. Thinking about how he had been used by the Sword Sect, Xiatian had a stomach full of anger. What did this count for? They didn't care about him at all? Before destroying him, they still wanted to squeeze out the last bit of value from him? Feeling a strong sense of contempt, the cold glow in Xiatian's eyes became stronger. At the same time, he said through gritted teeth, Xiaochen, don't be too arrogant. There will be a day when I will make you regret this. Knowing that he had been used and not being able to resist, this was a fact that Xiatian found hard to accept. At this time, Xiatian was already thinking of how to take revenge on the Sword Sect. After a while, Xiatian's eyes filled with killing intent and he disappeared on the spot. No one knew where Xiatian went, but it was definitely related to taking revenge on the Sword Sect. It was impossible for him to swallow this loss. Since your sword sect wants me to be the blade in your hands, then don't blame this blade for biting back at its master. Xia Tian wanted the sword sect to make a fool of themselves. Perhaps he couldn't let the sword sect's plan go smoothly, but he had to at least cause trouble for Xiaochen. Chapter 2633. That night, Xia Tian left alone and no one knew where he went. In the sword sect, Xianyuan Ling, who had just left Xiaochen's place, returned to his cave residence and was served a cup of tea by a maid. Xianyuan Ling had his hands behind his back as he looked at the bright moon in the sky. That night, Xia Tian left alone and no one knew where he went. In the sword sect, Xianyuan Ling, who had just left Xiaochen's place, returned to his cave residence and was served a cup of tea by a maid. Xianyuan Ling had his hands behind his back as he looked at the bright moon in the sky. It should be about time. Xianyuan Ling's words were very strange. On the other side, the Heavenly Policy Palace was also hesitating because of the Saber Sex matter, and Li Xiao was in a dilemma. Speaking of Li Xiao and Jun Wuya, Luo Xing's relationship was very complicated. Li Xiao and Jun Wuya were rivals in love. Li Xiao had always liked Luo Xing, but Luo Xing liked Jun Wuya. Although Li Xiao gradually let go of his feelings and even had a good relationship with Jun Wuya, Li Xiao was still a little conflicted if the Heavenly Policy Palace was to merge with the Sword Sect. Wouldn't that mean that he was under Jun Wuya? Merging with his rival in love was something that no man would be willing to accept. Although it had happened many years ago, there were some things that couldn't be forgotten just because one wanted to. Sitting alone in his cave residence, Li Xiao was very hesitant. Moreover, the people from the Sword Sect had already made it very clear that in a few days, all the great Emperor Realm Masters would gather in the Sword Sect. At that time, he would have to give an answer. If he refused, the Sword Sect wouldn't be so easy to talk to and would definitely take action. With the current strength of the Sword Sect, it wouldn't be too difficult for them to deal with the Heavenly Policy Palace. Li Xiao had a feeling that Jun Wuya was better than him. Thinking back to the past, Li Xiao tragically realized that from the beginning, he had been suppressed by Jun Wuya in every aspect. Whether it was in terms of cultivation talent, cultivation realm, or even women, Jun Wuya had always firmly suppressed him. As for Li Xiao, it was as if he had been living under Jun Wuya's shadow. Once, for the sake of Luo Xing, Li Xiao had challenged Jun Wuya, but he had lost miserably. At the same time, he had also tried to move Luo Xing with his true feelings, but he had also lost miserably. As for Jun Wuya, he didn't do anything and he had already made Luo Xing fall head over heels for him. Moreover, after so many years, Luo Xing's feelings for Jun Wuya hadn't changed at all. They were still as strong as before. Compared to Jun Wuya, Li Xiao felt that he was nothing. Giving a sigh, Li Xiao was currently at a loss and didn't know what choice he should make. But at this moment, Li Xiao's face that had been filled with disappointment suddenly sunk. He turned to look at the darkness behind him and angrily shouted. "Who is it?" It was pitch black behind him and he couldn't see a single person. However, as soon as Li Xiao's voice fell, a figure slowly walked out of the darkness. Seeing this figure, Li Xiao's face sunk and his voice became incomparably serious as he said, "Xia Tian." The person who came was no one else but Xia Tian. He never thought that Xia Tian would appear here. In response, Xia Tian said with a faint smile, "I never thought that the respected Heavenly Policy Palace's ancestor would have such a sentimental side. But since you hate Jun Wuya this much, how about working with me and exterminating the Sword Sect together?" It was clear that Xia Tian had seen everything just now. In response to this, Li Xiao's face sunk and he didn't say a word. Li Xiao didn't find it strange that Xia Tian would appear here. After all, Xia Tian was an Ancestor Realm expert. If he really wanted to infiltrate the Heavenly Policy Palace, it wouldn't be a difficult matter and it would be hard for the people below to find him. Staring right at Xia Tian, Li Xiao didn't say a word. Seeing this, Xia Tian acted like he was meeting an old friend. His lips curled into a smile as he spoke in an unhurried manner. "Strange Book Network, how about it? Isn't my suggestion good? The enemy of my enemy is my friend." Since you hate Junwei this much, working with me is the best choice. Xia Tian tried to rope him in. This time, Li Xiao coldly said, "It's nothing. Working with an evil demon like you, I'm ashamed." Li Xiao rejected him without any hesitation. Xia Tian wasn't surprised by this, as if he had already guessed it would be like this. With a look of regret on his face, Xia Tian said with a sigh, "Ai, it really is a pity. So you want to kill me now?" Li Xiao asked. Xia Tian appearing here, Li Xiao didn't think he was here to chat with him. Faced with Li Xiao's words, Xia Tian didn't hide anything and calmly said, "Since we can't be friends, we can only be enemies. The best way to deal with an enemy is to directly kill them." Saying this, killing intent appeared in Xia Tian's eyes. Seeing this, Li Xiao secretly raised his guard while looking for a way to escape. Naturally, he didn't think he was Xia Tian's match. The Emperor Realm and the Ancestor Realm were completely different existences and couldn't be compared at all. Noticing the change in Li Xiao's expression, Xia Tian said with a faint smile, as if everything was under his control. "There's no need to think about it, the surrounding space has already been sealed by me. It's impossible for the outside world to discover anything and you have no chance of escaping." Xia Tian had already cut off all possibility of Li Xiao escaping. As soon as he said this, Xia Tian took a step forward. His figure seemed to teleport as he directly appeared in front of Li Xiao. With such a fast speed, Li Xiao's eyes wildly jumped, but he didn't have any chance to react at all. Xia Tian's attack had already arrived, heading straight for Li Xiao's heart. At this critical moment, Li Xiao used all his strength to block it and avoided his vitals. In the end, Xia Tian's finger missed by a bit and couldn't pierce through Li Xiao's heart. Not being able to kill him with a single attack, Xia Tian said with a cold smile. "Not bad, but how many moves can you last?" Worthy of being a famous person, Li Xiao's combat awareness was indeed top class, but so what? It still couldn't change anything. Between the two of them, there was a gap that couldn't be crossed. If Xia Tian wanted to kill Li Xiao, it was a very simple matter, it was only a matter of time. After his attack failed, Xia Tian didn't hesitate and attacked Li Xiao again. But this time, Li Xiao wasn't so lucky and was heavily injured. Following this, although Li Xiao continued to fight to the death, in the end, the gap between the two of them was too big. Even if Li Xiao used all his strength, he still couldn't change anything. After 100 moves, Xia Tian's attack shattered Li Xiao's heart. An Emperor Realm Master, Heavenly Policy Mansion's old ancestor, died in his cave mansion just like that. His gaze began to slacken, and his body fell backward stiffly. It was as if he had died and his Tao had vanished. Chapter 26-34. Although Li Xiao had used everything he had and fought with all his strength, he had still died at Xia Tian's hands in the end. There was indeed a gap between the Emperor Realm and the Ancestor Realm that was difficult to cross. This kind of gap was not something that could be made up for by going all out. After killing Li Xiao, the smile on Xia Tian's face became even brighter. Next to Li Xiao's corpse, Xia Tian left a line of words. "Those who obey will live, those who defy will die." It was just a few simple words, but if anyone saw these words, they would immediately think of the Sword Sect. After all, the actions of the Sword Sect during this time had been seen by everyone. It was clear that the Sword Sect wanted to cleanse the entire boundless world and eliminate all those who posed a threat to them. Li Xiao was killed in such a sensitive period of time. Furthermore, there were 6 threatening words beside his corpse. Anyone would suspect Sword's Gate of being the culprit behind this. This was also Xia Tian's goal this time. He had been forced to become a blade in the hands of the Sword Sect, but Xia Tian was not willing to become a blade in the hands of others, so he had framed the Sword Sect. Moreover, Xia Tian had chosen Li Xiao as his target. It could be said that Li Xiao was the one who was most unwilling to join the Sword Sect because of his relationship with Jun Wuya and Luo Xing. Li Xiao could not be as calm as the others. Because of this, the world would believe that this was the doing of the Sword Sect. Because Li Xiao did not agree to joining the Sword Sect had made a move to kill him. First, it was to get rid of this hidden danger, and second, it was to warn others and let them make a choice. Xia Tian's idea was not bad. Once he thought of Li Zhao's corpse being found, the sword sect's reputation would suffer a large blow. Xia Tian couldn't help secretly feeling excited. He knew that just this matter alone was not enough to hurt the sword sect, but as long as it gave the sword sect a headache, Xia Tian was already very satisfied. Moreover, in the face of danger, the other faction's attitudes towards the sword sect would probably change slightly. Don't forget, even a rabbit would bite when cornered, and a cornered dog would jump over a wall. In a situation where there was no way to retreat, in order to protect themselves, the major forces would probably really take the risk. Adding in the fact that Xia Tian was adding fuel to the fire from behind, Xia Tian would definitely make a move after this, making the situation even harder to control. At that time, he would be able to stir up the large world, and he, Xia Tian, would be able to fish in troubled waters. His mood was very good. Looking at Li Zhao's corpse, Xia Tian said with a faint smile, "Li Xiao, being able to do something for this one before dying is your blessing. You can go in peace." As for killing Li Xiao, Xia Tian didn't feel anything at all. It was as simple as squashing an ant. As soon as his voice fell, Xia Tian disappeared on the spot and the restrictions around him quickly disappeared. It was like he had never been here, other than Li Zhao's corpse lying on the ground. The surroundings fell into a deathly silence as darkness covered everything. As for Li Zhao's corpse, it was silently lying on the ground without a trace of life. A silent night. That night, no one noticed anything strange with Li Xiao. Until noon of the next day, Li Chun hadn't seen Li Xiao for a long time. Feeling strange, he finally came to Li Zhao's residence. But once he came in, Li Chun saw Li Zhao's corpse and he was stunned on the spot. When he came back to his senses, Li Chun quickly ran over to Li Zhao's side, but it was a pity that Li Xiao was already cold. His eyes were red as he picked up Li Zhao's corpse. Li Chun couldn't help crying out in pain. After that, Li Chun also saw the 6 words beside Li Zhao's corpse. "Those who obey will live, those who defy will die." Seeing these 6 large words, Li Chun's eyes were filled with a strong hatred. It was like Xia Tian had thought. Faced with these 6 words, Li Chun's first suspicion was the sword sect. Moreover, being able to silently kill Li Xiao, perhaps only the sword sect could do this. Not long after, the high-level members of the Heavenly Plan Palace heard the news and came to Li Zhao's cave. Seeing Li Zhao's corpse, the high-level members of the Heavenly Plan Palace were filled with pain, and there were even some who were angrily cursing. Going too far, the sword sect is going too far. Could it be that they really think they can cover the sky with one hand? The palace master only hesitated for a bit, and the sword sect actually made such a vicious move. What is the meaning of this? Killing a chicken to warn the monkeys? Using our Heavenly Plan Palace to warn the other powers? We must get an explanation from the sword sect. That's right, we must get an explanation for the palace master. No matter how strong the sword sect is, they can't act so overbearingly. The high-level members of the Heavenly Plan Palace were filled with rage over Li Zhao's death. Although the Heavenly Plan Palace wasn't as strong as the sword sect, if they didn't even dare to fart when their own ancestor was killed, how could the Heavenly Plan Palace face themselves in the future? Moreover, in everyone's eyes, the sword sect's actions this time were indeed going too far. Those who obey will live, those who defy will die. What did this mean? Could it be that as long as someone dared to go against the wishes of the sword sect, they would be killed? The high-level members were filled with righteous indignation, and Li Chun didn't say a word from beginning to end. However, the hatred in his eyes conveyed his current feelings. The Heavenly Plan Palace was furious that Li Xiao was killed. Such a big matter naturally couldn't be hidden, and the Heavenly Plan Palace clearly didn't have any intention of hiding it. If they wanted to get justice, it was impossible for them to do it alone. Therefore, many of the high-level members of the Heavenly Plan Palace began to secretly contact the Moon Palace, Dan Valley, and other forces. They wanted to get an explanation from the sword sect together. Li Zhao's death was suspected to be caused by the sword sect. When the news spread, it naturally shocked everyone. All the major forces fell into a state of shock. Among them, there were some who were doubtful, some who were suspicious, and some who felt that the Sword Sect had gone too far. Many forces received the news, and the Sword Sect naturally received the news as well. Within the Sword Sect, Xianyuan Ling was the first person to receive the news from his residence. Looking at the elder in front of him, Xianyuan Ling's expression was calm and he didn't seem surprised at all. It was as if he already knew this would happen. After the elder finished speaking, Xianyuan Ling waved his hand and said, "I understand. You may leave." Hearing this, although the elder found it strange that Xianyuan Ling didn't have any reaction after hearing this, he still respectfully bowed and left the room. When the elder left and only Xianyuan Ling was left in the room, Xianyuan Ling softly muttered. As expected, they still use Li Xiao as an example. "Xia Tian, you're not willing to be a knife in my hand, but you've solved a large problem for me. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." End of chapter. Chapter 26-35. Xia Tian wasn't willing to become a blade in the hands of the Sword Sect, so he killed Li Xiao and shifted the blame to the Sword Sect. He wanted to create estrangement between the Sword Sect and the other large powers, even causing conflict to erupt. Like this, Xia Tian could wait for an opportunity to make his move. Only, Xianyuan Ling had already guessed Xia Tian's actions. The reason why he didn't stop him was because Xianyuan Ling wanted this result. Compared to the others, Li Xiao was the most difficult existence to deal with in Xianyuan Ling's eyes. First, it was because of Li Xiao's relationship with Jun Wuya and Luo Xing. Just based on this, it was hard for Li Xiao to accept joining the Sword Sect. Second, it was because the Sword Sect couldn't directly make a move against Li Xiao and the Heavenly Plan Palace. No matter what, Li Xiao and Jun Wuya had this kind of relationship. Once the Sword Sect directly made a move against Li Xiao, just Jun Wuya's side wouldn't be able to explain it. A person that couldn't agree to join the Sword Sect and couldn't personally make a move against him, the best choice was to borrow a knife to kill him. So, even if Xianyuan Ling had already guessed that Xia Tian would make a move, he didn't have any intention of stopping him. He didn't even tell anyone about his guess. Without moving, Xianyuan Ling used Xia Tian again. Borrowing Xia Tian's hand, he took care of the most difficult person to deal with, Li Xiao. Letting out a sigh of relief in his heart, while Xianyuan Ling was deep in thought, Xiaochen walked into the room. His face was calm and there was nothing different about him. But when he saw Xianyuan Ling, Xiaochen softly asked, "Do you know everything?" Xiaochen was clearly asking about Li Xiao. Li Xiao's death was suspected to have been killed by people sent by the Sword Sect. This matter had already spread through the wide world, so it was hard not to know. Hearing this, Xianyuan Ling gave a slight nod, indicating that he already knew. "What do you think?" Seeing Xianyuan Ling nod, Xiaochen continued to ask. "It's nothing, the innocent will know. It wasn't us who did it, no one can slander us." Hearing this, Xianyuan Ling softly said, "Who do you think killed Li Xiao?" "Third brother, you've already guessed it. Why are you asking me?" Xiaochen naturally guessed that Xia Tian was behind all of this. The reason why he asked this was because he had some things he wanted to say to Xianyuan Ling. If even Xiaochen could guess it, then Xianyuan Ling must have guessed it as well. He looked at Xianyuan Ling deeply. After a moment of silence, Xiaochen asked, "You knew this would happen, but you didn't do anything. Brother, you wanted to get rid of Li Xiao, didn't you?" Xiaochen guessed that the one who made a move was Xia Tian and guessed that Xianyuan Ling already knew about this, but Xianyuan Ling kept silent. He clearly had a chance to save Li Xiao, but Xianyuan Ling did not do it. He wanted to borrow Xia Tian's hand to get rid of the obstacle that was Li Xiao. Faced with Xiaochen's question, Xianyuan Ling did not reply or refute it. There were some things that he knew in his heart and it was best not to involve Xiaochen in this matter. The two brothers looked at each other. Looking at Xianyuan Ling's eyes, Xiaochen already knew everything. Taking a deep breath, Xiaochen stood up and looked at Shen Yuanling with a complicated gaze as he said, "It's been hard on you, big brother." Along the way, Xiaochen was no longer the simple youth from before. A power, a sect, they had a bright side and naturally had a dark side. Many times, if a sect wanted to develop, they had to use unscrupulous methods. But Shen Yuanling had taken all of this for himself. For the development of the sword sect, Shen Yuanling's methods could not be considered glorious, but to a large extent, he had cleared all obstacles for the sword sect. He did not have any intention of blaming Shen Yuanling. Shen Yuanling had done everything for himself, so how could Xiaochen blame him? He had given all the good things to himself and Shen Yuanling had taken all the blame for himself. Hearing Xiaochen's words, Shen Yuanling revealed a faint smile and his heart was filled with warmth. There was no need for words between the two brothers, but they could quickly understand each other's thoughts. Leaving the rest of the matters to Shen Yuanling, Xiaochen left Shen Yuanling's residence. When Xiaochen returned to his cave, he saw Nangongguan waiting for him in the distance. Seeing Xiaochen, Nangongguan took the initiative to speak with an angry face, "Sect Master, I have something to discuss with you." Nangongguan's expression was very unsightly. She no longer called Xiaochen junior brother, but directly called him Sect Master. With a single glance, Xiaochen could see that Nangongguan was different and abnormal, as well as the anger in her eyes. Xiaochen nodded calmly, then the two of them entered the cave together. In the courtyard, Xiaochen had Nangongguan sit down and personally made her a cup of tea. Nangongguan angrily said, Sect Master, don't you think Shen Yuanling has gone too far?" "Sect Master, isn't Shen Yuanling going overboard? My sword gate prides itself on being a righteous sect. However, the things we have done recently are even worse than the evil cultivators. First it was the Saber sect, and this time it's even worse. He actually killed Li Xiao. How will the world view our sword sect now?" Nangongguan had indeed come because of Li Xiao, and after listening to her, it seemed that she had already determined that Shen Yuanling was behind this. Indeed, the biggest suspect right now was the sword sect, and within the sword sect, Shen Yuanling was the biggest suspect. Hearing Nangongguan's angry accusation, Xiaochen's expression didn't change much. He was still incomparably calm, like an ancient well without any ripples. After Nangongguan finished speaking, Xiaochen indifferently said, "Senior martial brother, do you really believe that big brother did this? If it wasn't him, who else could it be?" Nangongguan angrily retorted. "Li Xiao is an Emperor Realm Master, but being able to kill him silently is impossible even for another Emperor Realm Master, unless it was an Ancestor Realm Master who took action. Right now, Honored Master is in the Saber sect, which means that only I can take action, but I haven't left the Sword sect recently, so who does Senior Brother think is behind this?" Killing Li Xiao silently without alerting anyone was indeed something only an Ancestor Realm Master could do, and in the current vast thousand world, there were only a few Ancestor Realm Masters. Nangongguan hadn't killed Li Xiao because she was angry before, but now that she heard Xiaochen's words, Nangongguan quickly reacted, her expression changing as she looked at Xiaochen with a complicated expression. Is Junior Brother talking about Xiatian? Xiaochen and Junwuya didn't take action, so the only one left was Xiatian. Moreover, Xiatian had a reason to do so, framing the sword sect after killing Li Xiaochen was obviously reasonable. Frowning slightly, thinking about it now, this was indeed the case. Realizing the truth of the matter, Nangongguan felt a little ashamed. After all, she had been certain that this matter was done by Shen Yuanling, begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of this chapter. Chapter 2636. This was because Shen Yuanling had been planning this the entire time and Li Xiao had died at this critical moment, so Nangongguan couldn't be blamed for suspecting him. This was because Shen Yuanling had been planning this the entire time and Li Xiao had died at this critical moment, so Nangongguan couldn't be blamed for suspecting him. To put it bluntly, because of the recent matters, Nangongguan already had feelings for Shen Yuanling, so it was very easy for her to form a preconceived notion. But hearing Xiao Chen's words, Nan Gongguan quickly found something strange. She also knew that there was a high chance that the one who did this was Xia Tian. Actually, this was a very normal matter. From the beginning, the matter of Li Zhao's death was easily explained by the Sword Sect. Xia Tian himself also understood this, so he never thought that just based on this simple matter, it would cause chaos in the Sword Sect. To put it bluntly, as long as the Sword Sect opened their mouth to explain, everything would be revealed. After all, this wasn't considered a high-level method of framing others. But there was one thing that couldn't be changed. It was that the Sword Sect did have thoughts about the other large powers, but even like this, once a gap was formed in their hearts, it couldn't be resolved just by explaining. The explanation was clear, but there would be a knot left in their hearts, and this knot was Xia Tian's goal. Even if everyone knew that Li Xiao was killed by him, so what? There was already a gap between the various powers and the Sword Sect, which gave Xia Tian a chance. In the future, Xia Tian would be able to expand this gap, causing the situation of the boundless world to fall into chaos. Nan Gongguan didn't think of this, but it was impossible for Xian Yuanling to not realize this. Actually, Xian Yuanling had already realized this problem. Once this matter came out, even if it was explained, there would be a gap created. If he wanted to eliminate this gap, it wouldn't be that easy. But Xian Yuanling didn't say anything about this and didn't even mention this matter to Xiao Chen. This was because in Xian Yuanling's heart, there was an even bigger plan. There was one thing that Jun Weiyao was right about, it was that having 4 people was the most reassuring. Xian Yuanling's side didn't make a move, it was unknown what he was planning. On the other side, Xia Tian, who had returned to his residence, also didn't make any movements. After killing Li Xiao, Xia Tian didn't have any intentions of making a move. What a joke, killing Li Xiao was to create conflict between the Sword Sect and the other large powers. If Xia Tian kept killing him, he would be playing into the Sword Sect's hands. Because of this, SS's heart. This was because if they all died's death, it would be over for the Sword S's problem would be solved. This would save them quite a bit. So, Xia Tian was very smart. He only made a move against Li Xiao and left the others alive for now. Anyway, he would deal with them when he saw the door. Knots. Time, they didn't. But just like Xia Tian, Dan Qingyang and the others had complicated feelings. At the same time, there was a trace of fear and dissatisfaction in their hearts towards the Sword Sect. Although some people had already guessed that this matter wasn't related to the Sword Sect, the Sword Sect clearly had the ability to make a move against Xia Tian, but they didn't make a move. What did this mean? Did this mean that the Sword Sect wanted to borrow Xia Tian's hand to kill them? The 10 great Ling Tian sects of the past, after these years of war, they had suffered heavy casualties. Mu Tian Mountain, Weapon Sect, Heavenly Yin Tower, Heavenly Sect, and Dragon Palace, these powers had already turned to dust and no longer existed. As for the Heavenly Plan Palace, because of Li Zhao's death, it was only in name. The only Ling Tian sects left were the Blade Sect, Moon Palace, Dan Valley, Talisman Sect, and Shrines. As for these sects, the Blade Sect had already agreed to join the Sword Sect, and Blade Xiong was also willing to join the Sword Sect to become an old ancestor. As for the Moon Palace, there was no need to mention them, they had already sent people to express their intentions. There was no need to worry about the Blade Sect and Moon Palace, so there was only Dan Valley, Talisman Sect, and Shrines left. On this day, Dan Qingyang's group of 3 had indeed come to the Sword Sect, saying that they wanted an explanation. The actions of the Sword Sect had made them nervous, so they had personally come. Xian Yuanling was not surprised by this. Moreover, the 3 of them didn't come looking for him, rather they came looking for Xiao Chen. In the main hall of the Sword Sect, Xiao Chen, Dan Qingyang, and the others were sitting together. Among them, the old ancestor of the shrine spoke with a dark expression. Sect Master Xiao, what is the meaning of the Sword Sect? Could it be that they won't even leave us a path of survival? What do you mean by this? Hearing this, Xiao Chen pretended to be confused as he asked this. Hearing this, the old ancestor of the shrine spoke again. Humph, if Sect Master Xiao says this, then there's no meaning. We all understand Li Xiao's death and we have never been disloyal to the Sword Sect, so why is the Sword Sect doing this? First, this one corrects something. Li Xiao's death is not related to the Sword Sect at all. Other than that, the Sword Sect has never thought of making a move against anyone. Humph, they haven't made a move, but they are very skilled at borrowing a knife to kill people. The words of the old ancestor of the shrines were without a doubt pointing out that the Sword Sect was using Xia Tian. Yes, your Sword Sect did not personally make a move against them, but you borrowed Xia Tian's hands to investigate them. Xia Tian could kill Li Xiao today and your Sword Sect did not make a move. Then tomorrow, Xia Tian could kill everyone else here and your Sword Sect would not make a move? Li Xiao clearly didn't need to die and the Sword Sect's main focus should be on dealing with Xia Tian, but things did not develop like this. After all these days, the Sword Sect did not have any intentions of making a move against Xia Tian. When Xia Tian tried to kill Li Xiao, the Sword Sect did not make a move at all. Being questioned by the old ancestor of the shrines, Xiaochen revealed a smile, but there was a trace of contempt in his smile as he said, "This one does not understand what you mean. According to what you're saying, my Sword Sect has to take responsibility for everything in the boundless world? In the boundless world, who knows how many people die each day? Could it be that these deaths are all blamed on my Sword Sect? Could it be that my Sword Sect did not properly protect them?" The facts were indeed as Xiaochen said. First, the Sword Sect did not make a move against Li Xiao and whether they were willing to deal with Xia Tian or not, that was the Sword Sect's matter. It was the same on the other hand. Xia Tian wanting to kill Li Xiao, how was that related to the Sword Sect? Li Xiao was not a member of the Sword Sect, so the Sword Sect did not have an obligation to protect him, right? To put it bluntly, this was not related to the Sword Sect at all. It was because they weren't strong enough and couldn't protect themselves, so who could they blame? Hearing Xiaochen's words, the old ancestor of the shrines, as well as Dan Qingyang's group of 3, had ugly expressions. Please add, please vote, please recommend. Chapter 2637. Xiaochen was right. The Sword Sect was the overlord of the Great Wide World, but they were not the nanny of the Great Wide World. They had no obligation and did not have the leisure to be responsible for everything in the Great Wide World. According to the meaning of the temple's old ancestors' words, it meant that with Xia Tian's appearance this time, all the people he killed should be counted as the Sword Sect's responsibility. This clearly couldn't be explained. Because they could not refute this, Dan Qingyang and the other two's faces became ugly. This was because Xiaochen's words had no doubt expressed the attitude of the Sword Sect. In response, Xiaochen sat on the main seat and calmly looked at the 3 people in front of him as he spoke in a calm voice. My Sword Sect's energy is limited, so it's impossible for us to not disclose anything. It's really hard for my Sword Sect to do the things you've mentioned. However, if it's our own people, then my Sword Sect will protect them with all its might. We will definitely not let something like this happen again. Hearing this, Dan Qingyang and the other 2 did not reply. However, with their intelligence, they clearly understood the meaning behind these words. To put it bluntly, it was to let them join the Sword Sect. As long as they were willing to join the Sword Sect, then they were their own people and the Sword Sect would naturally protect them. However, once they chose to refuse, then the Sword Sect would not care that much. After all, they were not part of the Sword Sect. It was very tactful, but the meaning was clearly expressed. This was what Xiaochen and Shan Ling had already discussed. However, hearing this now, Dan Qingyang and the other two's moods were clearly not good. Compared to before, the Sword Sect's attitude was clearly more resolute this time. They were determined to eliminate the influence of the Ling Tian sect in the Great Wide World and there was no way for them to give in. Hearing this, the 3 fell into silence. After a while, Dan Qingyang was the first to speak. AI. It's true that a new emperor brings new ministers. Sect Master Xiao, this old man had already expected this, but when it came to making a decision, I still hesitated. Dan Qingyang sighed. These words came from the bottom of his heart. In response, Xiaochen smiled. I know what everyone is thinking, but this is inevitable. Now is no longer the era where everyone only cares about their own family, so there must be a change. I can give you time to consider, but I hope that everyone can make a decision as soon as possible. Xiaochen was not willing to waste too much time on the internal affairs of the great wide world, so he acquiesced to Xian Yuanling's actions. Xian Yuanling's methods might seem sinister and find it hard to accept, but it was the most effective method. But Xian Yuan sects people's family. But the sword sect had the ability. Sect sword had the sect. They had the sect. Hearing Xiaochen's words, Dan Qingyang didn't say anything and just nodded. The conversation in the hall did not last for long. In the end, Dan Qingyang and the old ancestor of the talisman sect stayed behind. They needed some time to consider, but they did not choose to leave the sword sect. As for the old ancestor of the shrines, he also said that he needed time to consider, but he did not stay in the sword sect. Instead, he returned to the shrines. Xiaochen did not stop him. After asking Song Xing to arrange a residence for Dan Qingyang and the old ancestor of the talisman sect, Xiaochen went all the way to Xian Yuanling and briefly explained the matter. Xian Yuanling sneered. It seems that the old ancestor of the shrines is unwilling to merge with the sword sect. Although Dan Qingyang and the old ancestor of the talisman sect did not agree to merge with the sword sect on the spot, they did not choose to leave. This was equivalent to expressing their stance. Perhaps they had already made a decision in their hearts, but they needed some time to accept it. In any case, they were in the sword sect, so what other choice did they have? The reason why they did not leave was to reassure the sword sect. As for the old ancestor of the shrines, although he also said that he needed time to consider, he directly left. In essence, he was completely different from Dan Qingyang and the old ancestor of the shrines. Perhaps the old ancestor of the shrines had some other thoughts that he did not speak of. Right now, the Saber sect, Lunar Palace, Dan Valley and the Talisman sect are no longer a problem. Only the shrines and the Heavenly Policy Hall remain, Xiaochen said indifferently when he heard Xian Yuanling's words. There's no need to pay attention to the Heavenly Policy Hall. Without Li Xiao, they're already a pile of loose sand. We don't even need to do anything. It won't be long before the Heavenly Policy Hall falls apart on its own, Xian Yuanling replied. There was indeed no need to worry about the Heavenly Policy Hall. Without Li Xiao, the Heavenly Policy Hall was like a group of dragons without a leader. Even if the Heavenly Policy Hall was able to survive, it would probably be less than 10%. There was no need to worry about it. On the other hand, the shrines were a little more troublesome. The shrine's patriarch probably had other plans in mind after leaving this time. Upon witnessing the chilling look on Xian Yuanling's face, Xiaochen asked. So, what do you plan to do now? Die if you don't surrender, Xian Yuanling said flatly. Since the shrine's patriarch chose to leave, no one could be blamed for it. In this regard, Xiaochen understood what Xian Yuanling meant. Xian Yuanling was probably going to attack the shrine's patriarch. However, there needed to be a reason for him to suddenly attack the shrines. If he attacked the shrines for no reason, Dan Qingyang and the rest might be disgusted. As though sensing Xiaochen's concerns, Xian Yuanling said confidently. Don't worry, there will be a reason soon. Since the shrines don't choose my sword sect, their only choice is. Before Xian Yuanling finished speaking, Xiaochen had already guessed it, so he continued, Xiatian? That's right. Since the shrines weren't willing to choose the sword sect, the only choice in the entire world was Xiatian. According to Xian Yuanling's guess, perhaps the shrines would secretly contact Xiatian and form a cooperation. The content of this cooperation would be to rely on Xiatian while keeping the shrines. In Xian Yuanling's opinion, the shrines didn't have much of a choice and this was very normal. After all, in the entire world, there was no other force that could compete with the sword sect other than Xiatian. However, even if the shrines chose to cooperate with Xiatian, it would be like asking a tiger for its skin. It seemed like they could keep the shrines, but in the end, it would be like sending lambs into the tiger's den. But Xian Yuanling wouldn't give the shrines this chance. Once they found out that the shrines had any contact with Xia Tian, the sword sect would probably make a move against the shrines. Colluding with evil cultivators, perhaps even Dan Qingyang and the others wouldn't be able to say anything. When the time came, the sword sect would make a move to eliminate the shrines. It would be considered reasonable and no one would say anything. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. This chapter ends. Chapter 2638. Xian Yuanling guessed that the shrines would contact Xia Tian, so Xian Yuanling had already sent people to closely monitor the shrine's movements. As long as the two sides made contact, Xian Yuanling's side would be the first to know. Xian Yuanling guessed that the shrines would contact Xia Tian, so Xian Yuanling had already sent people to closely monitor the shrine's movements. As long as the two sides made contact, Xian Yuanling's side would be the first to know. Seeing Xian Yuanling's confident appearance, Xiaochen did not say anything else. He was indeed very relaxed during this time, with Xian Yuanling, Zhang Xing, and the others taking care of everything. Xiaochen had become a shopkeeper who did nothing. Xiaochen did not object and Xian Yuanling continued, "When we take care of the shrines this time, we can also take care of Xia Tian." Although Xia Tian had obtained the help of those old fellows from the Dark Era, compared to the last battle between good and evil, Xia Tian's threat to Xiaochen was not as great as before. Xia Tian had made progress, but Xiaochen's progress was even greater and the sword sect had undergone a complete transformation. So, if the current Xia Tian wanted to fight against the sword sect, it would be a very difficult matter. Keeping Xia Tian alive until now was just to borrow his hands to deal with the Ling Tian sects, giving the sword sect an excuse to take care of them. Now that his goal had been achieved, Xia Tian was not that useful anymore. Without any value, Xiaochen naturally could not keep Xia Tian alive. The two of them looked at each other with a smile and then Xiaochen quickly left, leaving everything for Xian Yuanling to take care of. The saber sect side was almost done. The disciples who were not willing to join the sword sect were dismissed and the people who were willing to join the sword sect would follow Dao Xiong and Jun Huiya back to the sword sect. When the time came, Zhang Xing and the others would arrange for these disciples to join the sword sect. What was surprising was that of the saber sect's disciples, less than a tenth of them did not join the sword sect in the end. The others all expressed their willingness to join the sword sect. This was not hard to understand. First, it was because Dao Xiong had joined the sword sect and became the old ancestor of the sword sect. Like this, the saber sect's resistance was much less. Second, it was because of the sword sect's strength. Everyone in the Great Thousand World knew that the sword sect was the most powerful force. Countless people racked their brains to join the sword sect but failed. Now that there was an opportunity, the saber sect's disciples would not give it up. The matter with the saber sect was going smoothly. Needless to say, the Moon Palace was even more so. Luo Xing was 100% willing to join the Sword's Gate. Furthermore, he had already made arrangements long ago. Those disciples who were not willing to join the Sword's Gate were directly dismissed by Luo Xing. The Saber Sect and the Moon Palace could be considered part of the Sword Sect. As for Dan Qingyang and the old ancestor of the Talisman Sect, although they did not give a clear answer, since they had chosen to stay in the Sword Sect, it was only a matter of time. The series of changes in the Great Thousand World also shocked many martial artists. They knew that from now on, the Sword Gate would be the only one in power. With the disappearance of the Saber Sect, Moon Palace, Dan Valley, and the Talisman Sect, which power could threaten the Sword Sect in the future? As for the Celestial Palace that was still wavering, it was nothing. With the Celestial Palace's prowess, it would be a piece of cake for the Sword's Gate to wipe them out. The only reason why the Sword's Gate had yet to make a move was because they were waiting for an opportunity. Xian Yuanling was closely monitoring the shrine's movements, sending back news every day. However, up until now, he had not found any contact between the shrines and Xiatian. Xian Yuanling was not worried about this because he knew that the shrines did not have a choice. It was either the Sword Sect or Xiatian. If the shrines chose the Sword Sect in the end, it would be even better. They would not need to make a move and they would be able to solve the problems in the Great Thousand World. If the shrines chose Xiatian, they would directly make a move and exterminate him. The shrines had been closely monitored by the Sword Sect for a long time. Dan Qingyang and the Talisman Sect's old ancestor, who were in the Sword Sect, had made a final decision after several days of consideration. On this day, the Talisman Sect's old ancestor took the initiative to find Dan Qingyang. The two of them were in the Sword Sect and Shaochen did not restrict their freedom, allowing them to walk around the Sword Sect as they wished. Other than some important places, they were not stopped at all. When they arrived at Dan Qingyang's residence, Dan Qingyang was not surprised by the arrival of the Talisman Sect's old ancestor. Instead, he said with a faint smile, "Since you've come to find me, I'm afraid you've already made your decision." His words revealed the Talisman Sect's old ancestor's intention. The Talisman Sect's old ancestor revealed a faint smile and said, "I've made my decision." "What about you?" "About the same as you." Upon hearing this, Dan Qingyang smiled and invited the Talisman Sect's old ancestor to take a seat. The two of them began to chat as they drank tea. "To be honest, I really can't bear to send Dan Valley to its grave. After all, this is my life's work." Dan Qingyang sighed as he took a sip of tea. No one would be willing to give up a force that they had built with their own hands. This was human nature. The Talisman Sect's old ancestor also expressed his understanding. However, the problem now was that they did not have a choice. Moreover, both of them were clearly aware that the Sword Sect had indeed done all they could this time. This was because the Sword Sect was fully capable of directly exterminating their Ling Tian sects. However, the Sword Sect did not do so. Instead, they gave them a choice and a way to survive. Although merging into the Sword Sect meant that the various Ling Tian sects had completely become history, many of their disciples had become disciples of the Sword Sect. This could also be considered as a disguised inheritance. At the very least, their lineage would not be cut off. Moreover, the Sword Sect treated these old fellows extremely well. It could be said that they had already shown sufficient sincerity. As long as they joined the Sword Sect, they would be able to become an old ancestor. Their status would be the same as Junwuya's. Of course, whether or not they were really on the same level, they still knew in their hearts. Although they were all old ancestors, they were completely incomparable to Junwuya. However, no matter what, they still had the title of old ancestor, and they did not lack various kinds of cultivation resources. On one hand, the Sword Sect had shown sufficient sincerity. On the other hand, the answer to whether they had a choice or not was already self-evident. Upon hearing Dan Qingyang's words, the Talisman Sect's old ancestor also had a helpless and bitter smile on his face. There's no other way. This is the general trend. No one can stop the general trend. That's right. Since that's the case, so be it. Moreover, I even contacted Dao Xiong yesterday. This old fellow's cultivation actually showed signs of loosening after he thought it through. This is really a blessing in disguise. Dan Qingyang's smile became even brighter when he recalled what Dao Xiong had said to him. He remembered that Dao Xiong's tone no longer had the slightest bit of stubbornness in the message. Instead, it was extremely peaceful. It could be seen that this old fellow had really thought it through. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 2639. Dan Qingyang smiled bitterly when he thought of Dao Xiong. That old fellow hasn't changed at all. Should I say that he's open-minded? Or should I say that he's open-minded? This old man actually told me that the world is now under the control of the juniors. Why don't we just join the Swords Gate and become the grand ancestors of the Swords Gate? Why should we bother ourselves with all these trivial matters? As for what the Great Thousand World will be like in the future, it'll be up to the younger generation. Didn't they go through the same thing in the past? Since Dao Xiong joined the Sword Sect, Dao Ju naturally had to join too. Moreover, Dao Ju joining the Sword Sect was completely different from Dao Xiong. Dao Ju would become a person with real power. Xiaochen attached great importance to Dao Ju, Xiao Xiao, and the others. Therefore, they would definitely be put in an important position if they joined the Sword Sect. This was also something that made Dao Xiong feel gratified. In other words, although they had joined the Sword Sect, the leader of the Great Thousand World in the future would probably still be Xiaochen. Dao Ju and the others had just changed from being in their own camps to being in the same camp. A smile hung on his face. In response to this, the Talisman Gate's old ancestor also smiled and said, "That brat from my clan also said the same thing. Let's just join the Sword Gate." Moreover, the Sword Gate seems to have already contacted that brat from my clan. Chumeng? Dan Qingyang looked at the ancestor of the Talisman sect and asked. The ancestor of the Talisman sect nodded slightly in acknowledgement. Chumeng was the only son of the ancestor of the Talisman sect and was also the current sect master of the Talisman sect. He didn't have any objections to joining the Sword Sect. Moreover, Chumeng had already contacted the Sword Sect, or rather, Xiaochen. Chumeng probably also knew that the reason Xiaochen wanted everyone to join the Sword Sect was so that they could contend with other universes in the future. Moreover, after Chumeng and the others joined the Sword Sect, it didn't mean that they would be neglected. On the contrary, they would be put in an important position by Xiaochen. According to Xiaochen, Sang Xing and the others were too old and probably had no hope of breaking through to the ancestor realm in this lifetime. They could handle some trivial matters, but if they were to carry the banner of the Sword Sect, they probably wouldn't be able to do so. Therefore, the Sword Sect would have to rely on the younger generation, such figures as Dao Ju, Xiao Xiao, and Chumeng, in the future. They were all talented individuals, the best of the best in the Great Thousand World. Their futures were limitless. They were the future of Sword's Gate, the future of the Great Thousand World. Moreover, the thoughts of the younger generation were obviously different from those of the older generation like Dan Qingyang. Experts of the older generation like Dan Qingyang cared more about the inheritance and the rules of their ancestors. However, the younger generation didn't care so much about these things. In other words, in the eyes of the younger generation, the Sword Sect was enough to represent the Great Thousand World. Therefore, joining the Sword Sect wasn't considered forgetting their ancestors. After all, they were all people of the Great Thousand World. Therefore, the younger generation didn't have much objection to this matter. However, there was an exception now, and that person was Li Chun. When Li Xiao was alive, Li Chun became the strongest person in the entire Heavenly Policy Hall and also the person who was under the most pressure. This was because Li Xiao's death was a huge blow to the Heavenly Policy Hall. For a time, the entire Heavenly Policy Hall was in turmoil and everyone was in a state of panic. There were even many elders and deacons who chose to leave. Some of them didn't even say goodbye. Seeing that the Heavenly Policy Hall was in a state of disunity, although Li Chun tried his best to stabilize the situation, it was a pity that his prestige was still inferior to Li Xiao's. At the very least, it wasn't enough to convince everyone in the Heavenly Policy Hall. Everyone was in a state of panic, which led to the Heavenly Policy Hall's destruction even faster. Li Chun didn't doubt that the Heavenly Policy Hall would only exist in name if the situation wasn't stabilized as soon as possible. Although there was still a group of loyal people following him, there were too few of them. They were basically a drop in the bucket and wouldn't have much of an effect. Li Chun sat in the hall with a gloomy face. He hadn't rested for half a month. He had been busy dealing with various matters in the Heavenly Policy Hall all day long. However, after half a month, the results were minimal. In the current Heavenly Policy Hall, there were dispirited disciples everywhere. They were confused about the future, and no longer believed in their sect. Moreover, this kind of mood was becoming more and more intense. His face was dark to the extreme. In Li Chun's eyes, although the person who caused this was Xia Tian, he hated the Sword Sect. He hated the sword sect for clearly having the ability to stop everything, but why didn't they make a move? They just watched as Li Xiao was killed by Xia Tian. Sword sect, Xiaochen, you put on a righteous appearance all day, but you are actually jackals of the same tribe as Xia Tian. Just because my heavenly policy hall blocked your path, you want to borrow a knife to kill people? In the hall, Li Chun couldn't help angrily cursing. Hearing this, a heavenly policy hall elder on the side quickly tried to persuade him. Sect master, you can't speak nonsense. If this reaches the sword sect's ears, the heavenly policy hall will be in danger. You can eat whatever you want, but you can't speak whatever you want. But Li Chun, who was clearly angry, how could he care about this right now? Faced with this elder's persuasion, Li Chun still kept cursing. Humph, why can't I say it? You have the guts to do it, but you don't have the guts to let people say it? What did my heavenly policy hall do wrong? Could it be that because Master doesn't agree to joining the sword sect, the sword sect wants to eliminate my heavenly policy hall? Moreover, they are using such a sinister method, borrowing a knife to kill people. What difference is there between the sword sect's actions and colluding with the evil path? Li Chun became more and more excessive as he spoke. The current him was already blinded by hatred, unable to see the essence of this matter at all. Indeed, the sword sect did have the idea of borrowing a knife to kill people, but the sword sect did not instigate Xia Tian. It was only because Xian Yuanling had guessed Xia Tian's thoughts. It could be said that Xia Tian killing Li Xiao was not related to the sword sect at all. The sword sect did not interfere, so if the sword sect didn't make a move to save him, what was wrong with that? Saving you was affection, but it was not an obligation. But Li Chun clearly did not care about this right now. He only thought that the one who caused this was the sword sect. It was because of the sword sect's indifference that Li Xiao had died and the heavenly policy hall had fallen to this point. He couldn't help angrily roaring into the sky. Sword sect, Xiaochen, I directly swear that I will obtain justice in this life. I won't accept this, I won't accept this. Li Chun's voice was very loud and he didn't intend to hide it at all. After hearing Li Chun's angry roar, the elder's face turned gloomy. He could naturally tell that Li Chun's emotions were a little off at this very moment. Begging for collection, begging for votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 2640. The hatred in Li Chun's eyes was almost gushing out. Looking at Li Chun's furious appearance, the elder shook his head with an ashen face. He knew that Li Chun had completely lost his mind because of Li Xiao's death. Everyone knew how serious it was for Li Chun to express his hatred for the Sword's Gate so boldly at such a time. If these words were to reach the ears of the higher-ups in the Sword Sect, Li Chun's outcome could be predicted. Perhaps Xiaochen wouldn't say anything, but what about the other higher-ups in the Sword Sect? Would they allow someone who hated the Sword Sect to exist in this world? What the Sword Sect needed now was stability. This was very clear from the recent actions of the Sword Sect. Li Chun's hatred was an unstable factor for the Sword Sect. Thinking about it, even Li Xiao and the Sword Sect could leave him in the lurch and could even be said to have deliberately set him up, let alone Li Chun. With the Heavenly Policy Mansion's current strength, it was tantamount to courting death if they wanted to contend with the Sword Gate. Therefore, if Li Chun was rational, he could not show the slightest bit of hatred, let alone not conceal it so openly. Li Chun's actions were undoubtedly courting death. He was challenging the Sword Sect's bottom line. It was hard to imagine how the Sword Sect would react if this matter were to reach the ears of the Sword Sect. However, no matter what their reaction was, it shouldn't be good news for Li Chun. There was no such thing as an airtight wall in the world, especially for the Sword Sect. With the Sword Sect's current control over the Great Thousand World, there were very few things that the Sword Sect did not know. It could even be said that as long as the Sword Sect wanted to, there was almost nothing that they didn't know. Therefore, Li Chun's roar in the Heavenly Policy Mansion's main hall and his hatred for the Sword Sect naturally spread to the Sword Sect and Xian Yuanling's ears. After listening to the elder's report, Xian Yuanling's expression did not change. He just waved his hand gently and said, "I understand. You may leave. Do we need to warn them about Li Chun? The elder asked hesitantly when he heard that. Li Chun had been insulting the Sword Sect all day long and crazily slandering the Sword Sect. Now that the Sword Sect knew about it, it was obvious that it had caused quite a commotion. If Li Chun continued like this, it wouldn't be a good thing for the Sword Sect. Therefore, the elder wanted to warn Li Chun to stop talking nonsense. However, Xian Yuanling said indifferently, I will deal with this matter. Xian Yuanling did not think of warning Li Chun. Given Li Chun's current situation, what was the use of warning him? If Li Chun was really afraid of a warning, then he probably wouldn't have said such a thing. To put it bluntly, the current Li Chun was like a gambler who had lost his eyes and did not care about the consequences. There was only one way to make such a person shut up. Xian Yuanling did not tell Xiaochen about this matter. That night, he found Long Qing and the two of them went to the Sword Sect alone. Xian Yuanling looked at Long Qing and said, Second sister, you know about Li Chun's matter, right? This brat has been insulting the Sword Sect and third brother all day long. He even said that he would take revenge one day. Yes. Hearing Xian Yuanling's words, Long Qing softly nodded. Long Qing had naturally heard about Li Chun's matter. Seeing this, Xian Yuanling's expression remained calm as he said, I want second sister to go there personally. Go to the Heavenly Policy Mansion? Long Qing asked. Xian Yuanling nodded in agreement. He wanted Long Qing to go to the Heavenly Policy Mansion personally. Soon, Long Qing guessed Xian Yuanling's intention. Her expression changed slightly as she said, You want to kill Li Chun? If it was just a simple warning, Long Qing would not have to come personally. Since Xian Yuanling had found Long Qing and met her secretly, there was only one possibility. Xian Yuanling wanted Li Chun dead, and the best person to do it was naturally Long Qing. First of all, Xian Yuanling did not have time to leave the Sword Sect for the time being. He had to stay behind to deal with other matters. Second, Tsang Xing, Nangong Guan and the others would probably not accept Xian Yuanling's orders. And Long Qing was just right. First of all, Long Qing was strong enough, and she was close to Xiaochen and Xian Yuanling. They had a close relationship, so there was no need to worry about Long Qing betraying them. Moreover, it was best to do it secretly. After all, killing Li Chun was not a good thing. It would also affect Xiaochen's reputation, so it was best not to have anything to do with Xiaochen. Of course, the main reason was that Li Chun was courting death. If he had not spouted nonsense, Xian Yuanling probably would not have touched him. He could even have let him go. After all, Li Chun was not a threat to the Sword's Gate. It was not impossible to let him live. However, Li Chun did not know what was good for him. He insisted on spreading rumors that were unfavorable to the Sword Sect. This was something Xian Yuanling could not accept. Obviously, the best way to shut Li Chun up was to kill him. When she heard that Xian Yuanling wanted her to go to the Heavenly Policy Mansion to kill Li Chun, Long Qing was stunned at first. However, she quickly recovered and nodded. Okay. Long Qing did not refuse because he knew that Xian Yuanling was doing this for Xiaochen's sake. It could be said that Xian Yuanling's actions during this period of time were all for Xiaochen's sake. For this reason, Xian Yuanling did not hesitate to bear the infamy. Recently, Xian Yuanling's reputation in the Sword Sect had plummeted. Many people thought that Xian Yuanling's methods were too vicious and despicable. There were many complaints about Xian Yuanling. If it was not for Xiaochen's forceful suppression, many people would have stood out to oppose him. But even so, Xian Yuanling did not have the slightest intention of backing down. This was because Xian Yuanling knew very well that the Sword Sect needed someone like him to clear all the obstacles in front of him. After completely clearing all the obstacles in the Sword Sect, Xian Yuanling would naturally withdraw. He would hand over all the rights in his hands and become an idle person who did not care about anything. But now, the matter was not finished. It was not time for Xian Yuanling to withdraw. Li Chun's matter was just an interlude to Xian Yuanling. After receiving Long Qing's reply, Xian Yuanling did not stay for long. He stood up and left. Second sister, it's best to do this in secret. Don't let others know. Also, don't tell third brother. If he asks about it in the future, I will tell him. After saying that, Xian Yuanling strode away. Long Qing also left the sword sect that night and rushed to the Heavenly Policy Mansion. Everything that was unfavorable to the sword sect was Xian Yuanling's target. It was the same for Li Chan. Chapter 2641. At night, the Heavenly Policy Mansion was in complete silence. Due to the recent turmoil, the entire mansion was filled with a gloomy atmosphere. Many of the mansion's disciples didn't seem to harbor any hope for the future. Under the cover of the night, a figure quietly entered the Heavenly Policy Mansion. No one discovered the existence of this figure. It was apparent that something big was going to happen in the Heavenly Policy Mansion tonight. At the same time, Dan Qingyang and the Talisman Gates Patriarch were in the sword sect. It was already late at night, but they weren't resting or cultivating. Instead, they were sitting on the stone benches in the courtyard. Li Chan, that kid. Sigh. What a pity. Dan Qingyang let out a sigh as though he felt sorry for Li Chan. Recently, Li Chan had been cursing and speaking ill of the sword sect and Xiaochen. Dan Qingyang and the Talisman Gates Patriarch were naturally aware of these matters. With their experience, perhaps they had already guessed what Li Chan's outcome would be. It was imaginable that Li Chan wouldn't have a good ending after cursing the sword sect and Xiaochen so brazenly. Upon hearing Dan Qingyang's words, the Talisman Gates Patriarch didn't respond. But judging from his expression, it was apparent that he had the same thoughts as Dan Qingyang. It was especially so now when Xian Yuanling was handling all the matters in the sword sect. Xiaochen basically wouldn't interfere, so Li Chan definitely didn't stand a chance. Compared to Xiaochen, Xian Yuanling was obviously more ruthless. If it were Xiaochen, perhaps Li Chan would still have a chance to keep his life out of consideration for their past relationship. But if it were Xian Yuanling, this chance was obviously non-existent. Xian Yuanling wasn't as sentimental as Xiaochen. In everyone's eyes, Xian Yuanling was like an executioner. He wasn't even willing to let go of the Dan Valley and the Talisman Gate, not to mention Li Chan. Li Chan had been completely blinded by anger and actually did such a suicidal thing. He did not doubt that Xian Yuanling would kill Li Chan. Perhaps Xian Yuanling had already made his move. Dan Qingyang and Li Chan had foreseen Li Chan's outcome. On the other side, in Li Chan's residence in the Heavenly Policy Mansion, Li Chan was drinking alone in the courtyard. His back view looked a little bleak. At this moment, Long Qing's figure suddenly appeared behind him. Since they were already here, Long Qing no longer hid her thoughts. Li Chan also noticed Long Qing's aura immediately. He poured himself a glass of wine and said without turning his head. Back then, Master was killed like this. What? Is Xiaochen going to use the same trick again? And this time, he actually took action personally. With that, Li Chan finished the wine in his cup in a single gulp. Only then did he turn around unhurriedly. He looked at Long Qing with mockery and hatred in his eyes as he spoke indifferently. Facing Long Qing's arrival, Li Chan did not seem to be surprised, nor did he have the slightest fear. It was as if he had already expected everything. Looking at Li Chan, who was much more haggard than before, Long Qing said expressionlessly, "The sword sect can't be blamed for Li Zhao's matter. You should know this clearly." Ah, it seems that I still underestimated the shamelessness of the sword sect. In order to control the Great Thousand World, you really can do anything. What? You dare to do it, but you don't dare to admit it. Li Chan replied. Li Chan had long blamed everything on the sword sect. He was certain that the sword sect was behind Li Zhao's death. Even when facing Long Qing, he did not have the slightest bit of regret. Hearing Li Chan's words, Long Qing frowned slightly. A faint chill rose in her eyes. Previously, she was still a little conflicted about killing Li Chan. But now, after seeing Li Chun for real, Long Qing knew that this person could not be allowed to live. It was no wonder that Xian Yuanling decided to kill Li Chun. This person clearly regarded the sword sect as a life-and-death enemy, the kind that would not rest until one of them was dead. Such a person could not be reformed. As long as he was not, he would always be at odds with the sword sect. Although Li Chun had a good relationship with the sword sect in the past, and even had Long Qing quite a bit of contact, that was in the past. Now, Li Chun had become the sword sect's enemy. Even if this enemy's threat to the sword sect could be said to be negligible, any danger must be nipped in the bud. This was what Xian Yuanling had always implemented. Since he couldn't reform Li Chun and couldn't change Li Chun's hatred for the sword sect, he could only kill him. Once he was dead, everything would end. Perhaps some people would say that the sword sect's approach was too cruel. No matter what, Li Chun had a good relationship with the sword sect. How could they kill him just like that? However, most of the time, many things were out of one's control. If it was possible, Xian Yuanling wouldn't want to kill Li Chun. However, there was no other way now. Li Chun couldn't turn back. He couldn't let go of his prejudice and hatred for the sword's gate. If a sect wanted to develop, it was impossible for it to have a bright side. It had to have a dark side. As the saying goes, a general's success was built on thousands of bones. If a sect wanted to develop, it was also built on countless bones. Some people you didn't want to kill, some people you were willing to kill, but you had to kill them. This kind of situation was not uncommon in any sect. Taking a deep breath, Long Qing said indifferently, "No one expected things to develop like this. Li Chun, you chose your own path. Since this is the case, you have to bear all the consequences." "I know. No need to talk nonsense. If you want to kill me, just do it," Li Chun replied coldly. Seeing this, Long Qing no longer spoke nonsense. Taking a step forward, his figure instantly disappeared and reappeared in front of Li Chun, throwing out a fierce punch. Now, Long Qing's cultivation had reached the Emperor realm grand perfection, much stronger than Li Chun. Facing Long Qing's punch, Li Chun did not choose to surrender. Although he knew that he was not Long Qing's opponent, Li Chun still chose to attack. Perhaps Li Chun knew the result from the beginning, but he still chose to do so. This was his stubborn side. He knew that it was a dead end, but so what? He still walked on this path without hesitation. The two's fists collided. Li Chun was directly sent flying without any resistance. Long Qing did not give Li Chun any chance to breathe. In response, Li Chun forcibly stabilized his body and immediately fought with Long Qing. The two fought fiercely, using killing moves. However, although Long Qing's attacks were ruthless, there was not much killing intent. This also showed that Long Qing did not have much killing intent towards Li Chun. But there was no other way. Li Chun was courting death. For the sake of the sword sect and Shaochen, Long Qing could only kill. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendation. Chapter 2642. No one came to stop the battle between Long Qing and Li Chun. Was it because no one in the Heavenly Policy Mansion knew about it? Or was there some other reason? But no matter what the reason was, no one from the Heavenly Policy Mansion showed up. Regarding this, Li Chun seemed to have an answer in his heart. Although he was seriously injured, he didn't have the slightest intention of giving in. However, he wore a bitter smile on his face. The Heavenly Policy Mansion that Master established single-handedly is actually a bunch of spineless cowards. They must have secretly submitted to the sword sect, right? It wasn't that no one noticed Long Qing's arrival, but after everyone noticed, no one stepped forward. It could even be said that Li Chun's remarks were probably secretly told to the sword sect by the higher-ups of the Heavenly Policy Mansion. They knew that going against the sword sect was a dead end, so they betrayed Li Chun. Or perhaps it couldn't be considered a betrayal. After all, there were people who tried to dissuade Li Chun, but Li Chun didn't listen at all. Everyone could tell that Li Chun was a little crazy. Since Li Chun was bent on seeking death, the higher-ups of the Heavenly Policy Mansion had no choice but to fight for a way out for themselves. It could be said that Li Chun had been abandoned by the Heavenly Policy Mansion. Li Chun guessed that he had been abandoned by his own sect. However, it could be said that it was the result of Li Chun's stubbornness that got to this point. Upon hearing this, Long Qing didn't say anything. Although his expression was a little ugly, Long Qing didn't stop. Li Chun's death was probably a foregone conclusion. Meanwhile, in the Sword Sect, Xiao Chen's residence. At this moment, Xiao Chen was sitting alone in the courtyard with a calm expression. Qin Shuru and Flower Fairy were beside him. Upon seeing that Xiao Chen seemed to be in low spirits, Flower Fairy asked softly, "Are you still thinking about Li Chun?" "Sigh, what a pity. We were once friends, but in the end, we were unable to walk together." Xiao Chen sighed softly when he heard that. Although Xian Yuanling didn't tell Xiao Chen about this matter, it didn't mean that Xiao Chen didn't know about it. Although it seemed that Xiao Chen didn't care about the Sword Sect, Xiao Chen knew everything about the Sword Sect. The fact that Xian Yuanling had sent Long Qing to the Heavenly Policy Mansion was naturally not hidden from Xiao Chen. Xiao Chen did not question Xian Yuanling about this because he knew what Xian Yuanling meant. He also knew that Xian Yuanling had done this for him. However, when he thought about Li Chun being killed, Xiao Chen felt uncomfortable. Although he wasn't very close to Li Chun, they were still acquaintances. Now that the Sword Sect had killed him, how could Xiao Chen not feel anything? He felt pity, but more than that, he felt helpless. After saying that, Xiao Chen took a sip of wine and said with disappointment, Li Chun, why do you want to die so badly?" If Li Chun didn't want to die, Xiao Chen definitely wouldn't touch a hair on his head. Even if he didn't want to join the Sword Sect, Xiao Chen could guarantee his safety for the rest of his life. Xian Yuanling also had the same thought. Unfortunately, the most uncontrollable thing in this world was the human heart. You couldn't control the thoughts of others. Just like Li Chun, Xiao Chen hoped that he could persuade him to let go of his prejudice and not seek his own death. But Xiao Chen knew that it was impossible. Li Chun wouldn't give up. That was why he could only kill him. Xiao Chen's eyes became a little red and watery as he spoke. He felt sorry and sad for Li Chun. "Chao. Please." At that moment, Xiao Chen seemed to have sensed something. His heart skipped a beat and his face turned pale. But in response, Xiao Chen shook his head and didn't say anything. Li Chun was dead in the end. He was killed by Long Qing. After Long Qing killed Li Chun with his final blow, the higher-ups of the Heavenly Policy Mansion appeared. They looked at Li Chun's corpse with complicated expressions. Some of them were sorrowful, some couldn't bear to see Li Chun die. Some even revealed regretful expressions as though they regretted their previous decisions. But no matter what they were thinking, nothing could be changed. One of the Heavenly Policy Mansion's elders cupped his fists and bowed to Long Qing. "Sir, there is no need for this. Give Li Chun a proper burial. Bury him together with his master." Before this person could speak, Long Qing had already waved his hand and spoke first. Li Chun was dead and everything was settled. There was nothing wrong with burying him. This was also what Xian Yuanling had specially instructed. Upon hearing his words, the higher-ups of the Heavenly Policy Mansion cupped their fists and thanked him. Long Qing didn't stay for long. After killing Li Chun, he left immediately as though he didn't want to stay in this place for a second longer. No matter if it was Xiao Chen, Long Qing, or Xian Yuanling, who decided everything, they felt incomparably bitter after killing Li Chun. After succeeding, the three of them didn't feel the slightest bit of joy. Instead, there was only a hint of sorrow. Humans weren't plants and couldn't be emotionless. If it wasn't impossible, no one would be willing to do it. Including Xian Yuanling. After receiving Long Qing's message, Xian Yuanling stood in the courtyard of his residence and looked up at the bright moon in the sky. After a long while, he let out a deep sigh. Then, he slowly poured the wine in the cup in front of him and said in a low voice, "Have a good trip." Li Chun was dead, and this news was spread across the wide world the next day. Of course, the ones who spread this news were the high-level members of the Heavenly Plan Palace. According to the high-level members of the Heavenly Plan Palace, Xia Tian had attacked the Heavenly Plan Palace again, and Li Chun had died at Xia Tian's hands. This matter was once again in Xia Tian's hands. But all of this wasn't important. Sometimes, who would care what the truth was? Just like Li Chun's matter. Many people guessed that it might be the Sword Sect's doing, but who dared to say it? Since the higher-ups of the Heavenly Policy Mansion said that Xia Tian was the murderer, then Xia Tian was the murderer. Even if Xia Tian refuted it, no one would believe it and no one would support it. Sometimes, when one's strength reached a certain level, the boundary between black and white was no longer that important. If one was strong enough, even black could be called white and white could be called black. Moreover, after the news of Li Chun's death was announced, the elders of the Heavenly Policy Mansion announced that they would join the Sword Sect. As for the disciples of the Heavenly Policy Mansion, those who were willing to leave wouldn't be forced, and those who were willing to join the Sword Sect would become disciples of the Sword Sect. For a while, the Heavenly Policy Mansion's matter seemed to have been perfectly resolved, but there was a dark side hidden behind this that made people's hearts heavy. However, this was something that couldn't be helped. There was nothing that only had light, and there would be darkness if there was light. The two complemented each other and couldn't be separated. You're tuning into the Mythic Realms YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.